Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Welcome to the Team House, episode 227. I'm Dave Park. Here's my co-host, Jack Murphy. Well, Jack's out. Tonight we have a very special guest, Nate Cornacchia, Special Forces. What rank did you get to, Nate?
So I'm first class.
Okay. Special Forces for about 10 years, 10 and a half years. And great stories tonight. So stand by. So Nate, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor. You know, you guys have some really impressive operators on this show, so I'm just honored to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. So what's your origin story? What led you into the military? Like, how did you
it's
get
an easy
your
one.
superpowers?
This is a really easy one, right? So my family has a very kind of storied military history. So my grandpa was in the 82nd. He jumped into Normandy on D-Day. My dad was a Green Beret as well, 46th Company. He was in the A camps in Vietnam. So for me, that was sort of an easy decision, right? You know, took me a little while to get there. I went to college first before I came in, but you know, it was one of those things. I really just wanted to be, you know, like dad, right, and grandpa in a way, because you know, sort of war heroes as your grandpa and your father, and you kind of want to live up to that. I don't really necessarily think I did, because those conflicts are just so crazy that they were in. But you know, it's cool that we have such a lineage that we have in our direct line, for sure.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it, when you think about the trench warfare in World War I, and then you know, like Normandy, and you know, and the Pacific Islands in World War II, and then the type of conflict that we had in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's very different.
Yeah, and you know, Vietnam as well, because you know, having a dad and also so many of his teammates that he's still friends with and contact with. So guys like Riley Lott, who was the NCOIC of Mike Forces for 7 years, who just passed away recently. He just got inducted to the Special Forces Hall of Fame. Guys like that, Jim Day and Mac V. Sog, these are guys that, you know, and my dad that I grew up around, listening to their stories. Right. You know, I have some pretty wild combat stories, and then I listen to their stories and I'm just like, good God, you know, like I've been through almost nothing, you know, comparatively in the combat realm from the guys who came before us, for sure.
So did you always know you wanted to be a Green Beret then?
So, you know, I mean, I was a Green Beret for Halloween when I was 5 years old. So, but I sort of lost, you know, I was an athlete all the way through college. So that was sort of my goal. Played baseball. So that was sort of my focus at the time. And then, you know, sort of through college, kind of found that, you know, I was completely lacking purpose. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And sort of kind of a weird story, just woke up randomly one day and was like, I'm gonna join the military. I'm gonna follow in dad's footsteps. Luckily, having a dad that was Special Forces, he knew about you know, a 18 Xray contract that could get me straight to selection. So that helped me a lot, having sort of the pathway already known from, you know, having a group guy as a dad. But that's sort of how that sort of whole pathway started for me. Was sort of a lack of purpose that led me into you know, going for this career, which thank God I did, because you know, who knows where life would have taken me otherwise.
Now, you know, we talked to a lot of, you know, guys in particular who are older, and like 9/11 was a defining moment for them. Maybe they were already in the military or they went in shortly thereafter. But for you, because you went in 2013, correct?
Yep.
So for you, there's already. Go ahead, please.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you know, for me, 9/11 was, I was in high school, so I was a freshman in high school. So I don't think I really registered, you know, obviously I knew, you know, what a terrible tragedy it was and whatnot, but I don't think I had registered what it meant as if had I been a little bit older and already at the age to be able to join the military at the time. And I think sort of by the time, I was 18, 19, I already planned on going to college and doing sports and whatnot. That sort of wasn't something I was even thinking about. So yeah, a little bit different in that regard, I guess.
And what was your awareness of the war up until that point? Because we had been in Iraq for 10 years. We've been in Afghanistan for 12.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely had friends from high school that joined, and I had buddies that that actually went to college with that had been in Fallujah and whatnot. And, they had gotten out of the service after that, and they were in college now. So obviously, I had the awareness of that, and still followed the conflict quite a bit because of my dad. You know what I mean? We're still definitely in a military family and followed that very closely. So I think I don't know, it's one of those weird things, again, for me, more so of, I've always been a huge patriot, coming from the type of family I come in, but more so for me, it was wanting to live up to what my dad achieved. And he didn't just achieve that. My dad's an insane achiever all around, right? He was a Green Beret. He became a politician for 16 years, lawyer for 40 years. So, I mean, he's hit the whole gambit of life success. But so for me, really, that was the big thing, is following in footsteps of dad more so. Now I found sort of that patriotism, and then everything, not more patriotism, but sort of the love of the military and all that as I went through the military. But up front, that's more of what it was than sort of love of country, typically that type of thing. Mine was more of a family tradition type of thing. Yeah.
So you get the 18 Xray program. Did you go to Fort Benning for the one station?
Yeah. Yep. So the way at least when I went through, right, it's been 11 years now, but the program basically sends you to basic training and to airborne school. And then, provided you make it through basic training, right? And then guarantees you to go to Special Forces selection. That's all it guarantees you, is a chance to go to selection. I went to Fort Benning, 4 months in basic training, and then you go straight to airborne school from basic. So you go right down the street, you do your airborne school, and then you drive up to North Carolina in process and get ready to go to selection. So that's how that whole
4 months. Did you go to the infantry basic after? It was the whole. So you got an MOS out of that.
Well, so we do. So you did your typical 16-week infantry, and then basic training, and then infantry AIT. That's part of the 18 Xray course, and I think they do that because, honestly, 90% of those guys are going to wash out and go to the infantry. So that way they already have the infantry MOS, but you don't actually. You still carry the 18X MOS the entire time until you either wash out and become a 11 Bravo, or you make it and you become an 18 series.
Oh,
so
interesting.
That's sort of how that works.
Now, did you do anything to prep? Because obviously you don't get in shape really in basic training. So how did you prep for SFAS?
You get actually in negative shape. I came in as a college athlete in incredible shape. I was ready to go, for sure. And basic training was massive hindrance, right? It brought my physical fitness levels way down. But as the 18 Xray, before you go to selection, there's a course called, I think it's SOPSI, Special Operations Preparation and Conditioning. So it's like a 3-week course all the 18 Xrays go to, that basically is just 3 weeks of getting back in shape. You get to do some land navigation, learn stuff like that, sort of prep you to go to selection, which is actually a huge benefit to go to that course. So that sort of lets you get back into the condition you were. And honestly, the 18 Xrays, because of that course, kind of go into selection at a much higher fitness level on average than anybody else.
Really?
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be more successful, but Usually, those guys, the 18 Xrays are getting the, best times on the runs and the rucks and all that type of stuff.
Right. Dude, for the SOPC, were they smart about the fitness and the conditioning, or did they just kind of smoke your bags?
No. Well, when I went through, it's an awesome course. They had guys that, like, the whole course was designed around actually functional fitness, recovery. You ate, like 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day. I mean, an awesome course to actually prep you. It wasn't your typical military, like, we're just going to break you before you go to selection.
Right.
It's actually designed to get you physically ready to go to selection. So probably one of the better courses that's part of the entire Q course.
That's fantastic.
Because it's not just a smoker.
Yeah. And then did you go directly from that into SFAS, or was there a wait period?
I think it was probably like a week
in
between. So yeah, you come out and then pretty much go right away, right after that.
And what did you think of SFAS when you were there, selection?
Oh man, at that point, it's funny. I had, I was fortunate, and I had a Green Beret as a dad, so I knew what the Q course entailed. Right, I knew the structure of it. I knew what SFAS entailed. I knew all the events. But, I only had 4 months in the military, and I was a little bit older, so I was 23 or 24 when I joined. So, but I mean, maturity wise, when you're around guys from Ranger Battalion, and E5s, E6s from the 82nd, and you've been in the military for 4 months, you really don't know anything. For me, I sort of just tried to carry, as my dad gave me the advice, carry as much weight as you can, and sort of just be respectful to people and keep your mouth shut for the most part. Because I was I had college, so as an E4, I came in as an E4, but I didn't know anything. So that was kind of my thing, was be the guy that, I was big. I'm 6'2", 220 pounds, so big, strong, carry weight, not complain, which can take you a long way in the eyes of your peers in a situation like SFAS, for sure.
Yeah. And then so you graduate SFAS, and then which MOS did you choose, or was chosen for you?
Well, so you get a wish list at selection, right, where you rank from first to last for medic, communicator, engineer, weapon sergeant. And so my wish list, I put engineer first. My dad was an engineer, so I wanted to do that. And then communicator second, which is what I ended up getting. So I ended up getting the 18 Echo MOS, which, I was never a huge fan of radios the whole way through my career, but, I was, I made sure I was good enough to get my team comms at all times, but I was never a radio nerd. Everybody always thought I was an 18 Bravo, group whenever they met me and didn't know what my MLS was. So.
Yeah. So you made sure that they didn't drop the fill, but you weren't big on wave propagation theory and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I make sure you got comms on the 152. I knew how to set up the SDN flawlessly. Other than that, like, don't ask me, if you're the commander, don't ask me to do any wazoo stuff. Right. We're not going down that road.
Yeah.
I'll get my junior to do that. That's sort of where I got to later in my career.
Yeah. And then where did you get assigned? What team did you go to? What group?
Yeah. So interesting. So I initially had Russian as a language and was supposed to go to 10th group. And then I ended up breaking my foot on a ruck, a 12-mile ruck. About 3 miles into the ruck, I stepped into a pothole that, because it had been raining on the side of the roads in North Carolina, stepped into it, and it was like 3 feet deep, fell in, broke my foot, ended up completing the ruck in time, which, I mean, I probably wouldn't have made it through the Q course had I not done that. But because of that, it reset me, and I had to redo that phase of the course and wait for my leg or my foot to heal, obviously. And then I got Chinese Mandarin as I got reset back into the system, and then first group. So that's how I ended up getting over to first group. And then, I got to first group with my group of guys. And then, you go into the sergeant major's office at battalion, and then he sends you over to the company, and you go into another sergeant major's office your first day. And Me and my buddy who went through the whole Q course together, both 18 Echoes, walked into the same company. He went in the Sergeant Major's office first, and he walked out and had a slot on the Halo team. And so I walked in second and sat down, and Sergeant Major pointed at the board and he says, all right, we got one spot on a team for 18 Echo if you want to be on a team. And obviously that's all I wanted. And he's like, all right, can you swim? Can you swim? And I'm like, oh God. And he's like, well, you had to do the dive team. So that's how I started my career, and ended up on a combat dive team for 3.5, 4 years. So yeah, that's where I ended up on my first team.
So when you went to Mandarin, was it there at Bragg, or did they send you DLI? How did that work for you, and how long was it?
So language school, at least when I went through, was right there at Bragg.
Okay.
And it's 6 months, 8 hours a day. And we had like an instructor from North Carolina State that was from Taiwan. So, I mean, you definitely are immersed and learn the language pretty well. It's, 6 months straight, 8 hours a day of your target language.
Yeah.
With Chinese Mandarin is just brutal to maintain. So, I could speak pretty well my, first couple years out, and then, 10 years later that OPI was pretty ugly, right?
Yeah.
I struggled through to get my 1-1
yeah.
most of the time by the end.
Yeah. So what was it like getting to first group, which is, focused on Asia, basically? You go to a dive team. Did you go, what was your setup for? Were they still on rotations, to Afghanistan? Were you set up directly for pre-scuba?
Yeah, so interesting sort of how that works, right? Because at that time, that was 2015, 16-ish. And we were really in the height of that 18-month rotation, all the groups, right? Where 6 months in Afghanistan, 12 months off, 6 months in Afghanistan, 12 months off. That's what all the teams were doing. We were rotating in and out and replacing everybody. So that was the entire focus of the battalion and our company when I got there. Mm-hmm. So I got there, immediately went on a trip to the Philippines, which was cool. That's just a first trip, just a training partner force type of deployment. Got back and then had a little bit of time to be able to try to go to dive school. Was in pre-dive, ended up tearing my meniscus in my right knee. And so I wasn't able to finish dive school. And then by the time I had recovered, we were straight into PMT for the next rotation to Afghanistan, which for, people who don't know, it's not just, you don't just deploy for 6 months to Afghanistan, right? You have that big train up that's usually 9 months that incorporates multiple PMTs, cephalic, all these different things you do as a team to get ready for that combat deployment. So it's really like a, 12 to 14 month sort of total of train up and deployment. So wasn't able to go to dive school because of that. Came back, and when I came back from that trip, I had to have surgery on both my knees. So by the time I recovered from that, we had another different trip we were going on to. So I actually never ended up getting to go to dive school after even being on a team for 3.5, 4 years. And there was another couple guys on the team that were the same way. We just never got an opportunity to go because that wasn't the focus. So,
right.
You're rotating out of combat, the Halo or the dive, nobody really, not that they don't care about that, right? But there's no water in Afghanistan, right? So that wasn't the big. So the focus was, you want to miss PMT and on all the train up for war,
right,
to go to dive school with your team, or do you want to be ready to go to war?
Right.
So it was kind of the situation that we were in.
What was that 6 month period, or whatever, of train up like? Because obviously there was probably quite a bit of combat experience on your team at that point in time, right?
A ton. So especially on that team for that went on our 2018 Afghanistan rotation, it was honestly, it was like an all-star team. Now I had no experience at the time, so I can't say I was an all-star, but the senior level group of the team that had basically been handpicked and put together, and we ended up having one of the highest profile missions in the country because of it. And yeah, I mean, Our senior, we had two 18 Deltas who both had like 7 years team time, right? The junior had like 7 years team time. And the most senior 18 Delta, who I ended up being on a team with for like 5-6 years, really like one of my biggest mentors. He had like 5 combat rotations already. The team sergeant had 3 or 4. Everybody on the team, other than a couple of the new guys, had multiple rotations through already. So, which was amazing for me on a first trip.
Yeah.
I basically just got to soak up so much knowledge. And by the time I had gone through a full PMT and my first combat rotation, I was so far beyond the average amount of experience for somebody at my point in career, combat experience wise, because of those guys on my team. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So with, you mentioned that your junior Delta had, 7 years, right?
Yeah, I think at that point he had like 6 or 7 years, and he was the junior, because our senior had even more time than that.
And I mean, obviously, he probably could have gone somewhere to be a senior. Was the team just very tight?
No, so he was the senior, right? And then he was the senior for like he had been the senior for like 2 or 3 years, and then our other older senior, who used to be, so I'll pull back. So when he was a junior, a new guy in the team, his senior, they're still the same 2 guys. This was years before I got to the team. It was his senior, right? And then he went on a broadening assignment for 3 years, came back to the ODA. And so his old senior was now his senior again, even though he had been the senior Delta for like 3 years up to that point. So that was sort of the joke of like, you're the new junior 18 Delta, even though you've been a senior he was the most senior 18 Delta in the company, other than his old senior who came back. So that's just how high of a level of experience this specific ODA had, with multiple guys like that in, MOSs like that, which is pretty rare to have that.
That's amazing. Real quick, we need to give a shout out to our sponsors. First, AARP Veteran Report. It's a twice monthly newsletter, guys. You don't have to be a member of AARP to sign up. It's free to sign up for the newsletter. They send you the newsletter. They don't spam you. But it's the AARP Vet Report. Our good friend Toby Harnan is the senior or the executive editor there. Justin Sapp, another one of our guests, has written newsletters for them. They have like My Hero. They have a number of different types of articles. They talk about what people have done in the military and what they're doing now. They talk about veteran issues. It's a fantastic, if for veterans or anybody who has an interest in what's going on in the veteran community, it's a fantastic publication that they put out. And like I said, it's free and they don't spam you. You just get the vet report. Check that out at aarp.org/vet report. That's aarp.org/vet report. It's free. I mean, not too many things are free anymore. Our other sponsor is Vitamin One from our good friend Mike Taylor, who's been on the show before, Special Forces legend and fugitive from the, not fugitive, but was responsible for getting Ghostin out of Japan. That was a great episode. But, Mike, one of the things that I don't know if, you're in your experience too, Nate, is like a lot of the, the drinks they have out there are just thick. They're syrupy. They don't feel like they hydrate you.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that, that Mike thought, hey, I can do this better. And he did. So Vitamin One, you can get it on Amazon. It has no sugar, tons of vitamins and all the electrolytes, the niacin, everything you need. They're super fresh. They're tasty. They're not heavy. They're delicious and they're good for you. So check out Vitamin One. The link is below. Check them out on Amazon. We go through a ton here. These are all empty, but they have a lot of different flavors. Great stuff. So back to you, Nate. So what was it like your first deployment? You have this long history of family in combat, and now you're deploying.
Oh yeah, man, that's a good question. I don't think anybody's asked me that question before. So going into my first deployment, I actually felt quite confident just because of the men that were around me on that team, right? I mean, I had just guys that were honestly sort of legends in, the sort of legends in the company and the battalion already.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives you a lot more confidence than, I knew that this team had been put together, sort of handpicked by the command team to do a really high profile mission. But, I also knew in the back of my head, like, oh shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. Right. And for example, right out the gate, our very first combat operation, we had the 160th fly us in, and we landed on the fucking X. Sorry, my language. I don't know.
No, you're fine. You can cuss as much as you want here.
Okay.
We encourage you.
We landed on the X, right? So I jump out of the 160th bird, look up, and the compound is boom right there, and there's murder holes everywhere, right? So I'm like, oh, holy shit, this is for real, right? But the way our team sergeant had set it up, he sort of had put sort of each of the new guys with one of the really experienced seniors. But then he also, not the very first couple missions, so we get our feet wet, but then he also made us new guys, the element leaders, and sort of had the more experienced guys there with us, sort of as gatekeepers to keep us in line. Mm-hmm. But in doing that, sort of, massively increased our experience so fast because we were so integrated into the planning process and actually leading elements, doing all the stuff typically senior guys would be doing. So we learned fast, right? And we also, we had a really high op tempo. We were doing missions about every 5 days, pretty much all period of darkness, nighttime raids, all, we had talked about it before the show, but so we were in the Kandahar area operating through that sort of heroin Silk Road for people who don't know, from, Pakistan up through Kandahar into Helmand and then out towards Iran. There's a lot of Taliban activity in that area. So we were really targeting big facilities, taking down, not really looking for drugs at all. We weren't doing any CID stuff, but taking out sort of big targets along that road because the Taliban, typically wanted to hold those areas. So yeah, for the first deployment, I mean, that was a pretty wild first deployment, right? It was super kinetic. We were in tons of gunfights, tons of missions. So, it was feet to the fire real fast. And yeah, but awesome at the same time. It was kind of, that trip was kind of like 2-3 combat deployments in one when you take the amount of stuff we did.
What year was it that you landed in Afghanistan?
So 2018. So I tell people this. So basically, I think we were on 30-day pre-deployment leave when Donald Trump, made that famous statement that we are not here to nation build, we are here to kill terrorists. So that was 3 weeks before we landed into Afghanistan. The ROE changed and we went after it. So we were there to basically take it to the Taliban, and then part of our battalion was also clearing out the Nangarhar Valley, and basically that was the time we pretty much eliminated ISIS out of Afghanistan up through the Nangarhar Valley. That was all sort of that same timeline on that same trip. My ODA wasn't operating in that area, but some of our teams in the company were on those big ISIS clearing operations at the same time, just to give it an idea of what time frame that was.
So it's 2018. What was the SF mission at that time? Was it like Robin Sage? You said you were flying on the 160th going Kinetic. So there wasn't a lot of the sort of unconventional warfare style, correct?
No, not really. My ODA was working with the 3rd SOC Commandos and the 3rd SOC A&A Special Forces guys. And no, it was pretty much every mission we did was nighttime raid. I mean, over and over and over again. Everything, there was really no nation building, or there wasn't no partner force development. We barely ever trained with the guys. We pretty much just went on missions. So sort of that UW type of thing, we didn't do any of that. It was all point target. We are there to disrupt and destroy as much of the Taliban capabilities as we can in our area. So that was the whole focus for that.
And how was it working with the Afghan SOC?
Yeah. So so the commandos were rough, right? Real rough. We ran into some definite sketchiness a lot of the time, but we had the actual ANA Special Forces guys, which those are the guys that go through a real Q course with Special Forces instructors. Some of those guys have been doing it for 15 years. They've been fighting the Taliban for the entire conflict. And those guys, some of them are legit. I mean, I wouldn't say they're at the level of an American Special Forces guy, but I mean, no bullshit, some of these guys. So when we had the ANASF guys, we were able to really, take it to the Taliban in a lot of ways because they were willing to fight, right? They were willing to get their hands dirty. Whereas the commandos, when the bullets started flying, they were sort of like, nah, we're not really actually interested in this war thing, right? We're just going to lay down and sort of hide and let you guys take care of it. So
how did that work for you guys? You had, I assume, a 12-man ODA, and then you had an indigenous partner force that would go in with you. Would they lead the assault? Would you lead the assault? How did that all work out?
So, the tactics we use have changed year by year by year by year and what we do. So at that point, it had gotten to basically single file movements everywhere. So we would obviously plan the missions. We led the missions. So I would, as an element leader, I would have, the Afghan team leader next to me for that element. Mm-hmm. And I would be telling him what to do. And he would then tell his guys what to do, right? I would say, hey, we're going to this compound. We're going to this compound. That sort of thing. But yeah, so I don't know. Sorry. Back up. What was the
just about how the dynamics was with you and them. How the assaults would work. Yeah.
So we had our 12-man team, but we also would try to plus it up with a lot of different enablers, right? So we had an Air Force combat controller that did all of our fires type of stuff. We had a SOD-A. We had 2 EOD techs. We would bring out usually 4 or 5 uplift guys, so infantry guys that would be security for the commander and the CCT. So we would have probably about 20 Americans total on the ground. And then usually 50 to 60 Afghans. Because we were working with the SF guys most of the time, we didn't need as many Afghans to be able to get as much done. Mm-hmm. So that would usually be about the structure. And we worked pretty much in 4 elements so that we could clear large areas, because the compounds, it's not like Iraq and Afghanistan. The compounds are so spread out between 200 meters between each compound. Mm-hmm. So you'd work in 4 different elements with 2 or 3 Americans on each element. And that way you could work together as a big organism to clear large swaths of compounds that way. So that's sort of how that was set up for clearing operations, I guess you could call it, through big villages, I guess.
Right. And if you're flying with the 160th, I mean, obviously you're doing operations similar to what the Rangers are doing or Tier 1 elements are doing. When did SF sort of move into that? Do you know when SF moved into that role, when they started flying 160th and doing those direct hits?
So we didn't have 160th for every mission, right? Yeah. That was like when we got lucky. And really at 160th, they picked the missions. Yeah. So when they're like, oh, that's a cool one that they're going to do, we'll fly them. Most of the time we had regular Army pilots. But yeah, so now everybody sort of had different mission sets, right? Like we had other SF teams that were doing sort of the drug CID type stuff. We had over in like in Herat and areas like that. We had teams doing the big ISIS battalion-sized clearing operations where you had a whole company of SF teams moving through valleys. So everybody sort of had a different mission set in that regard. But I think that started more around like 2015, 16, as we went away from VSO in 2013, and we went back to the big bases.
Yeah.
So that's because we would fly in we lived on Kandahar, and we would fly in from Kandahar hit these targets and fly back. So I think that's kind of when we went away from VSO. That's sort of when we transitioned to sort of that more conventional style point target rate type
Yeah. For the senior guys on your team, the guys who had been back and forth, what was their opinion of SF doing like Kinetic versus VSO and things like that?
Yeah, so quite a few guys on my team, their prior trips were VSO trips. So that's really when that transition, sort of 2012, they were doing VSO, and then the next trip they were doing what we were doing. You know, I mean, honestly, like living conditions, you know, it's sort of a lot better when you've got Wi-Fi and you're living on CAF and there's surf and turf at the chow hall when you get back from doing your raid, comparatively to living 6 months in a mud hut.
Yeah.
But I think they enjoyed VSO more, you know, because you got to do so much. You were so more immersed in the fight and in the mission, and you were doing stuff during the day, and you could actually drive around and do all kinds of different stuff. Whereas us, it was kind of like we're on base and we do hits, right, and we come back. There wasn't a whole lot of being immersed out in the culture or anything like that. That's sort of the first 10 years of the war. What SF was doing.
Yeah. You know? Yeah, we've had Scott Mann on, who was one of the guys I think who really pushed to get those VSO operations going, and then I think before we saw any results, we just kind of like the government just shut them down, or the military.
Well, you know, the thing is though, is that with VSO up into 2012, I mean, we had pretty much taken over the country.
Yeah.
I mean, it was super effective once we, you know, figured out how to do it. And then we decided, we're just going to draw down VSO and give all this back to the Taliban. For example, in some of the areas and the missions, I'm sure we'll get into talking about, we were going into areas that some of my buddies had taken in VSO 3 or 4 years before.
Yeah.
That we had already owned, that now we're going back in to do hit targets on. You know what I mean? So in that regard, it didn't make any sense. It was like, what are we doing? Why did we just give this all back to them for no reason? But,
yeah. Yeah. And for people who are watching or listening, VSO are village stability operations, which are similar to like what the A camps in Vietnam, the Marines, the close action platoons, or civil, I think close action, but basically creating those sort of domains of control by, you know, not taking over village, but inhabiting the village, helping the people out and creating the stability that way.
Yeah. So the biggest way they would do that is, you know, and Afghanistan is very rural and tribal, right? So a team would be in and they would be with the village elder, and then they would develop, you know, a police force or a fighting force, and they would be able to sort of secure their own territory against the Taliban. That was sort of the idea behind that, and then enable them to do that.
Yeah. But obviously, even if VSOs are more effective, Kinetic is sexier, a lot sexier. Yeah. It briefs better, right? It briefs better.
It does, for sure, right? And it's a lot cooler to you know, send in a team in the middle of the night with AC-130s and A-10s, and you know, and ISR watching all of it. So yeah.
So you said your first stop, you guys landed on the X, which is right on the target. Was that your first firefight, or when was your first firefight?
Oh yeah, no. So I mean, we got in a few. Our very first operation, we did get in a little bit of a firefight towards the end, but I mean, it scuffled out pretty quick. Our first, and then our next couple operations, we got in smaller ones, ticks here and there. Nothing like too crazy to talk about. But the biggest firefight that I got into was, or our team got into, was the mission I was telling you about earlier, where we got near ambushed twice, and you know, all the guys on my team have Valor awards, and upwards of, you know, our 18 Delta has a Silver Star. stuff like that. So that was the huge, like when you talk about real firefight, when I think about, now we got a few more after that later in the trip as well, big ones, but that was actually sort of towards the front of the deployment when it comes to major gunfights.
So can you set it up and walk us through these near ambushes? What was the mission profile? What did it look like? How did it all go down?
Yeah, so I'll give just a backstory to what we were doing. So again, we were going into an area in Tarin-Kot, which is, maybe 40 minutes north of Kandahar, which again, this area had been completely controlled by us during VSO. And now we were going back in to try to sort of take that area again. We had done a few operations sort of through the valley in that area. And this one we had figured was probably more of a Taliban stronghold. We had a really good intelligence sergeant on my team at this deployment who was able to find all kinds of crazy stuff. But he had sort of figured out that this was most likely where a big stronghold was, where a lot of potentially Taliban leadership were at. So that's why we were going in to hit this target. And so with the way it worked, because of the terrain, we had to plan on infilling the helicopters about 2 kilometers west of the main compound we were going to try to hit. Just for whatever reason, I don't remember exactly why, but we had to do it that way. And we were going to infill both helicopters, CH-47s, with about 60 guys in 2 different elements, and then clear from west to east to get to these compounds that we were trying to get to. So the way I like to explain it. So anyway, I'll just say we land on the CH-47s. My element does. We have 2 elements, about 2 groups of 15 guys. And I'm main element leader of this mission, so I'm basically the head guy in charge of our element. And we land sort of offset of this big open field, which there's on the Google imagery, kind of a big dilapidated compound about 100 meters away. And as I'm sure you know, on ISR, you can never really trust exactly what that imagery looks like, right? That might be a lot different than what it was, but it looked like it was old and dead. And, no Americans had been in this area for 4 or 5 years. So we figured there's no reason for the Taliban to, be randomly posted up in this compound, 2 kilometers away from their big hub.
Right.
So we land on the CH-47 sort of in this wooded area, and we're walking through the trees. And the best way I like to describe it so people can visually see it through their eyes as I walk you through how this all happens is, imagine you're sort of walking through the forest and you're coming up to an open area. You know how that looks coming out of the forest. And think about you're basically on the 50-yard line of a football field. And so you got the big open football field in front of you, and you look to your left, and the end zone, there's basically a compound that is the size of the entire end zone. And it's night, obviously. And so we come out and we start walking towards that compound, because in the plan, we plan on just bypassing this compound because we had 2 kilometers to go. We didn't have time to just clear all this random dilapidated stuff, right? So we're moving up towards the compound. We're hitting probably the 30-yard line, 20-yard line, 10-yard line. And then we turn to horizontally move alongside the compound to come around and bypass it. So we're paralleling the building now, right? So as you're walking, the building is to your left about 10 meters. And we get most of my element out in front, and we're in a big open field in front of this compound. And all of a sudden, as we're walking next to this compound, all hell breaks loose. Just fucking gunshots, machine gun fire. It's just absolutely insane. And so at first it's what in the hell is going on? Let me back up real quick. So as I'm walking up to it, I'm talking to the Predator drone, and he tells me the slant is 000. There's no one inside this compound. You guys are good to go, right? So that's how we're feeling as we're going to move around. So anyway, all of a sudden, boom, out of the movies, shit is going haywire. Gunshots everywhere, machine gun fire. turns out there wasn't zero. We find this out later, right? We don't know this in the moment, but we find out later there wasn't 0 guys inside. There was 10 Taliban insurgents inside, and this was a built-in defensive fighting position with a bunker, all kinds of shit. They had PKMs, RPGs.
Wow.
Everything. So we basically are now out in the open, and we've just been near ambushed, right? And so and immediately all our Afghans lay down, right? And I'm the element leader, so I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And I see off right next to me, to my front, to my right, my 18 Bravo's got the Mark 48 machine gun, and he's basically got it on full auto, spraying it into this compound, trying to get us fire suppression so we stop getting shot at.
Right.
As my 18 Charlie runs up to the wall, and he starts throwing grenades over the top of the wall just to try to get the fire suppression. And I'm basically picking up the Afghan team leader and guys by the back of the collar, because I'm, as an element leader, I'm like, we have to get out of this open field. Battle drill 1 alpha, something, I don't know.
Right.
We can't just stand in this open field. We're all going to get shredded. One of the guys next to me, he goes down, he gets shot. So guys are getting shredded as this is happening. And so as this is all, and again, it's crazy to talk about this because how long this lasted, I still don't know. Was it 2 minutes? Was it 15 minutes? I don't know. But as I'm trying to get these, and I'm firing back, right, trying to grab guys, we got to move. They won't. They're just immediately dropping back down on the ground. And as I'm trying to do that, my senior 18 Delta, the senior I was talking about, he had like 5 combat deployments. This dude he absolutely crazy. He would run. He loved to run towards bullets, right? He comes sprinting up past me, full speed, running straight at this near ambush, and yells at me as he comes by, like, "Hey, we got to go, man."
Yeah.
And so we realized like that the Afghans aren't going to do anything. This is too crazy. It's just 4 SF guys that basically have to eliminate this threat. So my teammates, they're up front. They're throwing grenades. I see the guy right next to me here in the doorway. He gets shot and goes down. At first, I don't know if it's one of my buddies or not, because my teammate was right by him as well. And so I run over, grab him, drag him out of the way, realize it's an Afghan. So sort of throw him off to the side, tell my XO, hey, put tourniquets on him, which... Funny story about that. So we brought out the company XO. He wasn't a special forces guy. We just brought him out so he could get a combat operation.
Uh-huh.
His first ever time out on a mission, and 5 minutes into the objective, we're in a near ambush, and he's getting bodies thrown at him, and his eyes are that big, But so my teammates are still throwing grenades. The firing's going on. At some point, my 18 Bravo, he is now racking in another 200 round drum, still on full auto and spraying in the doorway. That somehow at some point we'd killed enough guys through, firing in the doorway, throwing grenades, all that type of different stuff, throwing grenades into the bunker that they were firing out of, that I think we killed 6 that way, that the last 4 panicked and they ran out the back of the compound. So it started to die down, and then our CCT told us, "Hey, we have you got 4 guys fleeing out the back." So we didn't know if they're trying to maneuver on us or whatnot. Right. So the AC-130 says, "Hey, we're going to strike these guys."
Yeah.
And so with 105 rounds, and they're 40 meters away from us, so it's everybody run up, dive behind the compound walls as they strike a couple different times, and so that all starts to die down. And we realized, okay, we've eliminated everything here. We call in medevacs. We start medevacing our guys that had been shot, and we're like, okay, we're 10 minutes into the operation. We still have to conduct this operation. We still have to hit this compound, and there's still another even worse near ambush further on in this operation. So. Because we had infilled on 2 different elements, our second helicopter was supposed to land in that open field in front of that building. And for whatever reason, the pilot screwed up and overflew the airfield and landed 300 meters past it. Had he not, he would have landed that CH-47 10 meters in front of all of that, which would have been, immediate catastrophe, just by the stroke of God, that we didn't have a CH-47 with 40 guys just immediately shot down on.
Yeah, I was wondering, because when you described the field with the compound, but it was an old compound, and it sort of led to, to the stronghold. If the tactical leaders of the Taliban were like, if they set down, they'll set down in this field, and this is where you'll hit them.
I mean, they didn't have 10 guys in there for no reason.
Right.
They hadn't built that into a giant DFP for no reason. So
right.
I think, because they don't do that just everywhere, right?
Right.
And we didn't expect that at all. So I think, it kind of made sense, because it was that was the only place that we could figure out where we could land based off of the terrain. And then they had, this huge defensive fighting force ready for us right there where, we decided was the best place to land. So
how was this compound set up? Because you mentioned the walls and then the doorways, like the opening to the compound. Did they have elevated positions too, or were they mostly shooting through the doorway?
So the way it worked, there's your big, like 8-foot compound mud walls, with big doorways in between. There was a few of those.
Okay.
They also had sort of a bunker built that was raised sort of out front of the walls, and then buildings sort of drop set about 5 feet back from the compound walls, that they were back offset in those buildings, basically taking shots out from the buildings through doorways, through secondary doorways. Wow. If that makes sense.
Wow, it was a good setup.
Yeah, so they were ready for us for sure. But then, and then I can go into, further into the operation where the second near ambush happens.
Absolutely, please. So how do you guys consolidate? Does the second team move to the compound, or do you guys move to them?
So at this point, now they're because they overflew us about 300 meters. They're towards the objective, and they basically got off and they kept moving. So
right.
The front element now is probably like 700-800 meters ahead of us. They're just trucking towards the objective. So we get our guys medevaced out. I get everybody back together. We end up bipping the DFP, blowing it up so they can't use it anymore. And then we pretty much just hightail it out into, the open field. And now we're, going full speed, bypassing everything to try to catch up to our front element.
Right.
So that's sort of how we're doing it. So we so nothing much happens there other than us, moving through the field about 1,000 meters.
And is your front element, are they moving because basically now the target's compromised, they know somebody's there. So they're moving out trying to stay ahead of trying to keep the tactical edge basically?
Yeah, for sure. And while this is happening, there's all kinds of movement and activity in the compounds they're approaching, and we have our air striking targets nonstop out in front of them, right? So they're moving to basically bring the fight as our air is prepping the objective there for them. So kind of have two different things in two different places going on simultaneously. And once we also really, because of the way it had infilled, they couldn't really come back to help us anyway, because they would have potentially been moving back towards us that way. So they pretty much, the team made the decision, hey, to keep going. We're going to keep going. You guys obviously are okay. And you guys will catch up with us once you get that situation figured out.
Yeah.
So we had basically moved through that open field, and our front element had gotten to a compound probably about 50 meters away from the final objective. And we had pretty much caught up to them, and we're basically a compound back from them. That we got into a compound. We decided to sort of take a tactical pause. And then we started getting chatter on the TERP phones and ISR that there was another compound right next to us, basically in between us and the front element. that there was chatter that they were setting up another ambush for us to walk through in between the compounds. So me and the commander made the decision, hey, we're going to stand by for a second. We're going to have the Apaches level this compound with Hellfire rockets so that we can move up and support the front element, right? So that we don't get ambushed again, because at this point we've taken a bunch of casualties. We can't really afford for something like that to happen. So as we're prepping that strike for that to happen, all of a sudden, and I'm sitting in the compound sort of, we've been moving east this entire time. And I'm looking at the compound wall towards, our lead element is, I know they're in front of me on the other side of this compound wall. And again, out of nowhere, boom, all hell breaks loose. Machine gun fire. I can see the tracers of machine gun fire flying over the top of the compound walls towards us. So we know, we can't tell exactly what's happening, but we know, oh shit, our front element is right here where all this is going on. And so I didn't see this with my own eyes because we couldn't get up to actually see over the top of the compound wall. So this comes from obviously my buddies and their Valor Award citations and everything of what happens here. But so as we're waiting for the strike to come in, they were moving around a compound sort of into a hallway between two compounds. Mm-hmm. And then as they got into this hallway, they basically got ambushed again, except for them. The Taliban were ready and were throwing grenades over the top of the walls down into the hallway that they were all in. So 3 of my teammates who are in that hallway, one of the grenades lands between my 18 Charlie's feet. Literally between his feet. Blows up, blows his pants off. Completely fucks him up. The guy behind him, all 3 of them get blasted by grenades. The Afghans get blasted. And then at the end of the hallway, after they did this, they had a PKM set up.
Wow.
So it was just fatal funnel shred, machine gun, grenades coming over the top of guys. It's just about as worst situation as you can get. Two of the SF guys were completely basically blown off the out of the hallway into this culvert ditch, and a bunch of the Afghans got shredded. And it was basically our 18 Delta, and who had just been hit by the grenade, mind you, and the Afghan team leader who had been shot in the face were the only 2 guys coherent enough to keep fighting. And they somehow fought through this hallway and killed the dude at the end of the hallway with the PKM and eliminated that. And our 18 Delta then drug out, obviously, the 2 SF guys first, got them behind cover, went back, drug out all the Afghans, and then he ended up obviously treating all those dudes as we all then got back together. And at that point, we had taken so many casualties that we got forced off the X. We hit our brain fart. What do you call it when you take too many casualties? Anyway,
like the mission critical.
You know what I'm talking about. So much of your fighting force is now incapacitated that you have to move off the objective.
Yeah,
and we had to emergency infill because we had taken so many casualties, and that just turned into a big Kazovac, up to an open field that we could get the helicopters in to get all our guys out that had been, shot and blown up and all those things.
Now, when you guys are making this infill when you guys are actually doing this exfil, are you still receiving fire, or is the air suppressing that pretty well?
No. So at this point, the air, and again, we had an AC-130 on station. We had 2 A-10s, 2 F-15s, 2 Apaches. So at this point, because you get everything sent to you when you're in this heinous of a firefight. You know how that works, right? So at this point, we had every asset available in the entire area above us. And they just once they realized we had taken, and they're watching this happen as well, that we had taken so many casualties and so much damage, they just started leveling basically that entire compound in defense of friendlies, which allowed us to basically pull everybody off the X. And they basically had their heads completely suppressed down to where those guys, they're not popping out to try to shoot us at that point because there's so much hair watching them.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was that the rules of engagement had changed just before you guys went in. What had they been, and how did they change for you guys?
Yeah, so there was two different ROEs for us, depending on whether you were Taliban or ISIS, right? The way it had worked, it got worked for ISIS. It was kill on sight, sort of that Fallujah style military age male. If you're ISIS, you're getting shot in the face, even if you're on the toilet, unarmed. Doesn't matter. For the Taliban, it was now basically imminent danger and hostile intent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you know how that works, right? So
Yeah.
if basically you're out at night and you're doing sketchy stuff, even if you're not armed, if you're moving in the middle of the night to maybe go and place an IED or whatnot, you can be considered a threat. So that's what the ROE changed to. And before that, it was, especially in the Obama era, it had gotten to the point of basically you had to receive fire before you could even engage a target. Even if you were watching Taliban maneuver on your position, you weren't allowed to engage until you actually received fire. So sort of went from that to, taking the chains off the dog.
Right.
And, if you're there doing dumb stuff in an area you shouldn't be, you're probably not going to make it out.
Well, and because you had mentioned like the AC-130 taking out the maneuver element that had, fled the compound. And
yeah.
And that was a discussion for a very long time. Are they squirters? Because you can't shoot squirters. You can't shoot somebody running away. But so many times these people were running to better positions. They were running to caches.
Exactly.
And they were maneuver elements.
That's how that was framed. Framed is that they had just ambushed us, and now they were moving to a position of tactical advantage, right?
Right.
So the AC-130 is allowed to strike in defensive friendlies because of that.
Correct. Yeah. It gets complicated. And obviously, when you go into a place like Afghanistan where you're fighting side by side with, with the host nation force, precautions need to be taken. Like you don't want to harm innocent people.
For sure.
But, the Taliban was very good at using those rules against us.
Yeah, and we saw some gross things on our deployment, right? We had a young child killed that was strapped to the chest of a Taliban insurgent, right? Using them as body armor, right? So stuff like that is, is a reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's some of the harder stuff you see, but you're right, but.
So what was you mentioned the M48 earlier, that your Bravo had the M48, which I've never used it. I assume it replaced the M60. Is that right? Or did it replace the SAW?
Mark 48 is basically a SAW that shoots a 7.62 round.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's the SOCOM variant of the SAW. It's sort of a 7.62 machine gun that you can one man carry. And it has a 200 round drum that you slide in like a SAW, so that you don't need multiple people to shoot. So it gives you that extra firepower that a SAW doesn't have because it's shooting 5.56,
right? But
still in a one man carry.
And then for you guys, for the guys who weren't the weapons guys, like what were you carrying?
So I carried the Mark 48 a lot. Actually,
okay.
When I was an element leader, your whole focus is running the elements and the team leader and all that. I would carry an M4 with maybe a 320 grenade launcher or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up by the end of the deployment switching our loadout to carry just a ton of grenades. So we would carry 6-7 grenades per guy, just because, as we just talked about, that was the type of fighting we were getting into in these compounds. Sort of that grenade battle type of stuff. Or bunkers, all kinds of stuff like that. But when my other teammate, who we typically worked together, either I was element leader or he was, the other one of us who wasn't at the time would carry the Mark 48, so that we would have that firepower. And you would usually have two, right? You would have one on each of the elements, so that each element had a 7.62 machine gun. So that's sort of how that would work.
Now, were you guys carrying like standard grenades? Were you carrying the minis? Were you carrying thermobarics? Like what?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I would usually carry because there was so much bunkers in what we were doing in Aruzgan and Kandahar, and I'm sure we'll get into another story that involved this massive bunker field type of stuff we got into. So we would carry a couple thermobarics for sure, because we could just collapse DFPs so easily in these tunnels that they were using.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd usually carry 2 thermobarics, maybe 4 or 5 regular grenades, and then maybe 1 incendiary grenade if I needed to, make it easy to burn all the drugs, because we would find, even though we weren't doing specifically drug stuff, we would still find, like 300-400 pounds of heroin in operation, like 10-20 bags of 20-pound heroin, and it just makes it easy to
like that black
take all the
tar.
AKs. Yeah, the black tar stuff.
Yeah.
But it just made it easy just to burn all that stuff really easily. So yeah, that's how that grenade loadout would look.
Yeah. Do you remember your first time using a thermobaric, or somebody like?
I do. Yeah, I got a great story about that.
Please.
So my 18 Delta, who again, guy I worked with the longest as a team guy, and then he took a team sergeant slot in Okinawa, and I ended up going and traveling to be on his team as one of his team guys, as he was a team sergeant. So anyway, we were moving together, doing some stuff, and again, we found this bunker system that we're going to collapse. First time I've been around a thermobaric, right? And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to throw this in this bunker," right? So he throws it in the bunker, and he takes off running, and I, kind of look over my shoulder, like, "What is he doing?" And it goes off, and I'm standing way too close, and it ends up, my lip right here had been a little bit chapped, in the center of your lip gets chapped, and it blew my lip apart, ripped my whole lip apart from the overpressure of it, and I was like, "Oh my God," you get your face blasted back. So that was my introduction into what a thermobaric grenade is. So after that, it was like throw it in and run as fast as possible.
Yeah, they're effective.
Yeah.
They're heavy, but they're effective.
Yeah, for sure.
So okay. Yeah. So like what? So you guys exfil this target. You get back.
Yeah.
How are the guys on your team? Because it sounds like someone got rode hard and put away wet.
Yeah. So my 18 Charlie, the one he took the brunt of it, right? So amazingly, the grenade that hit him, again, it like basically blew his pants off. His whole face was, pressurized, burned, everything like that, all the way up his body. He took 0 shrapnel, which we still have no idea how.
Amazing.
Because the guys behind him ate all the shrapnel for some reason. Who knows? Grenades are weird like that.
Yeah.
He was massive TBI, massive concussion for a while. And he ended up having to go to the senior leader course like 3 days later. He got pulled out of Afghanistan for us, that's how you become an E7. It's more important than a combat operation, I guess. So he basically, massive TBI, trying to fly, go to this course. He basically told us he had no idea what was going on. The instructors just gave him a pass because he was so messed up. And then my senior 18 Echo took a bunch of shrapnel through his arms, but he ended up being okay. And then our 18 Delta, who got the Silver Star, which honestly, I tell you that story, he probably should have the Medal of Honor. Because all those dudes would be dead if he wasn't able to do what he did. Which pretty much all the Valor awards on that mission were downgraded, one, even his. So because the general decided NCOs shouldn't have that high Valor awards.
Right, and the XO that was with you didn't get one, so why should you guys?
Yeah, so, and then he took a bunch of shrapnel in his hand, and the worst part about him taking all the shrapnel in his hands is he was basically inside of the guts of these Afghans, sewing them up and doing stuff with bare hands, shredded apart, right? He had to deal with all the medications and all that stuff to make sure he was okay. But of all of that happened, I think we took 14, 15 casualties, guys being shot in the face and the stomach and the chest and blown up. No one died on that mission.
Even the Indians?
They might have later, the Afghans, I don't know, right? Because that's a lot of nasty damage, but up front, nobody died. And I think we killed 58 Taliban on that mission. So
that's
we got pushed off the objective, so it wasn't necessarily a success, but the fact nobody died was good.
Yeah. I mean, you got pushed off the objective, but you still like killed 58. It was 58.
Yeah.
You know, 058.
Yeah, and that was definite. And you could, the fact that they were willing to fight us that crazy, that hard, let us know that there was important people in that area. So we definitely did a lot of damage to a high profile area for sure.
Do you know, was it Afghan SF or Afghan Commandos that were with you that night?
Afghan SF. That was the thing, is those guys typically, and I watched them do some crazy stuff later in the deployments, but even they, in that situation, were like, no way, man, we're not moving. We're going to lay down and shoot into the darkness. But it's one of those things where, again, I had, for me, had I not had, my senior Delta just basically sprinting straight into a near ambush into gunfire, I might not have realized what to do either, right? So, because it was just such a heinous, crazy thing out of nowhere, that having a guy like that who had 4 or 5 combat deployments, been in so many crazy things, and Helmand and Musa Calais and all these insane stories, that having him there was huge, right? For the rest of us on the team, the other SF guys, to know, okay, we can do this, right? We can eliminate this threat. All we got to do is move and do the things that we're trained to do. Yeah. Which that sort of gets into that, how important that war experience is, and why I'm a little bit worried about us going away from war and combat, and what that's going to look like for the future generations, because it's such a massive thing in actual combat to have guys like that. Yeah. When you're a new guy, for sure. Yeah.
And the thing is battle drills aren't fun to do. And I think a lot of guys, like, it's just human nature that when we're doing battle drills, like, we check out after a while, we just go through the motions. But like you're talking about, a near ambush, getting off the X is, it's vital. And yet, to speak to what you were doing, you were trying to help out the Afghans. Like, you were trying to get them off the X too. But and it's one of those, like you say, it's just one of those things that it always degrades. Like, we went from Vietnam, and it took a long time to relearn all the lessons that guys like your dad, like, instinctively did.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because I had the immediate response to do those things that we do through training, right? Mm-hmm. My immediate response was, okay, we have to maneuver, right? I have to maneuver on this. We weren't able to, but it's interesting that you say that, as once that degraded, it was sort of, what do I do, right? Like, these guys won't move. Right. And it's a guy with all this experience that, is the one that kind of snaps into your head of, like, oh shit, okay, we got to do this. Yeah. That you can't really train for those type of things. Yeah. Right? You kind of just have to gain that experience through actual time in gunfights.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned how the Afghan SF, like, my experience with both Afghans and Iraqis is, if you train them for CQB, they're good at doing CQB. But if a problem arises during that time, if it's something that they haven't necessarily trained for or have down, a lot of times they didn't have that lateral thinking, so they would vapor lock.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because, again, like I said earlier, I watched some of these guys do really impressive stuff on missions later, but it makes sense, because they were doing things that they were very proficient at when they did it. Whereas a situation like that is definitely not something that anyone really trains for. So the fact that they sort of just shut down kind of is exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it just reminds me of, the old idea that if you take the prone in a near ambush, you'll never get up.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And we were not in a position of advantage, right? What are we going to do? Lay in that field and shoot at an open doorway? Like, we're going to all die eventually if we stay here and do this. So
how long did it take your team to sort of recuperate to be able to be operational again?
Yeah. So two of our teammates, our 18 Delta was okay because he had to get his hands stitched up. He got, his hand shredded a little bit, but he was all right. So he was continued to be on the team in our operations, but our 18 Charlie and our 18 Echo were messed up to the point where they were out for a couple months, I think. Mm-hmm. And then we actually plussed up guys through the company, so the B team, mm-hmm. And from other teams that weren't doing as much, we were able to, get SF guys from different ODAs in the company to come out on operations with us to help us sort of plus up those numbers while our teammates were out from injuries.
Now, you said your XO wasn't SF. Did your XO go out on any more ops after that?
No, he is now.
Yeah,
he is now. So he went to the Q course, after years later, and he made it through, and he's a Green Beret now. But yeah, I think he might have come out on a few more after that. Oh, I got to tell you the funny story about that. That brings me back. So the Afghan that I drag and throw in front of him, and he had been shot through and through the bicep a couple times here and here. And our XO had thrown tourniquets on him, And so I run back over after everything's calmed down to check on the guy real quick. And this Afghan is laying there on the ground on his back, and he's got two of his buddies staring down on the ground. And I look at him, and his tourniquets are all off, and he's just bleeding out to death on the ground. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Why are his tourniquets off? And the Afghans are like, oh, they're hurting him too bad, so we took them off. So we throw, I grab the tourniquets and I throw them back on, and I run over and grab my 18 Delta, and I'm like, hey, get over here and check on this guy, make sure he's not dead. His buddies almost killed him, But just, as heinous as that whole thing was, just I remember even laughing in the moment of like, wow, you guys are fucking,
yeah,
that is dumb, right? But anyway,
it's a testament to your XO though that he went out there and it was just a taste, and like it led him on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. He was a good dude. But again, just the fact that, that's your first, your first operation, just immediately in the shit, as you would say,
Yeah. So you guys get plussed up. Like, how long is it before you're back out again, your next mission?
I think, after that one, I think we waited a couple weeks. I think that definitely slowed us down a little bit as we, sort of were making sure our guys were okay and refiguring out that whole thing. But I think it was a couple weeks, and then we were back out on operations. So it wasn't that long, but
you might not have any like essay of this, but do you know if they sent a follow on after that compound, knowing that it was probably something important or into that area?
I don't. So we continued to operate through there quite a bit for the rest of the trip, but yeah, we didn't go back in there exclusively. I think we kind of got our tail put between our legs a little bit, and it was just a nasty area again, terrain wise.
Right.
There just wasn't any good way to get in there.
Right.
So it was one of those things where you had to infill, offset, and walk to there, and they were obviously ready, and they weren't going to give that up. So
yeah,
it kind of was one of those things of like, we don't really know what is in there, so is it really worth us continuing to go in there, or can we have effects, better effects further out in the area?
Yeah, it's kind of once they let you know, it's like put in a Marine company and put them online and let them just like move through.
And again, we had such the bulk of our battalion doing the Nangarhar Valley ISIS clearing operation during that time that we didn't really have anything like that for us to be able to get multiple ODAs in there to actually take that down.
Were you guys or other sister teams, like were you operating in larger than ODAs at any point in time?
So we didn't as a team, but yes, a lot of our teams were. So again, that Nangarhar Valley was an entire company. I think they had 4 or 5 ODAs. clearing the valley together.
Uh-huh.
And then I think our team in Helmand and Herat worked together a little bit because that Musa Calais area was Helmand. Just the entire war was just such a nasty place that the Taliban just never were willing to give that up.
Yeah.
And it was such an integral part of that drug trafficking road there through Helmand that that was always a nasty place. So our ODA didn't do multi-team clearing operations, but our company did a lot of them. Out in Farah, there was, in Herat, we had a couple of ODAs working together. So
yeah.
It's a normal thing, but our team pretty much exclusively was working by ourselves down south at the Kandahar, Ruzgan area.
So what was your next stop then out the gate after that?
Oh man.
If you remember, I know it all blends together at some point too.
Yeah, it does. There's so many that were sort of generic nighttime raids. We get in, small gunfights here and there. The air would strike. We'd kill 10, 20 guys, clear through, not really find anything. The next most memorable one is the one where our ODA found the largest cache of HME ever found in Afghanistan, which that's kind of a fun. There's no gunfights involved in this story, but it's kind of a cool story for the fact of what we accomplished and what we destroyed. So I could go through that one.
Yeah, please.
It's not as long, but it's kind of a cool story.
Please,
and again, we set the record for that. So yeah, we had, and again, this was, I think, in the Ruzgan area. So same sort of valley that I'm talking about, Terracotta, Ruzgan, and all sort of runs in the same area. And that the prior mission took place in. And for whatever reason, I don't know how our intelligence sergeant figured this out. Again, he was incredible, super smart dude. But we decided to go in and hit this area because, it looks like an area of interest, and it's in the same area. And we get in, we infill, we're maybe like 300 meters off the first compound. And the very first building we get into, there's first compound, there's one Afghan there. Oh, let me backtrack. So this area actually, another ODA had been in a year prior to this same compound. This is why we went in. And they had gotten this massive blowout gunfight. The 160th had to come in, and they had to be emergency exfilled off. So it was a crazy area about a year ago. So we figured, hey, we're going to go in here too and test our luck. So that's actually how we ended up going into this spot. So we infill, and so now we're expecting a fight because the prior ODA had gotten such a shit show that, and we had just come off of, the one we had been in, that it was like, okay, we're going in and we're ready for a fight. And the very first building we get to, a young Afghan, maybe 16, 17 years old, comes out and he's like, yeah, there's Taliban here and they have all their stuff right there in that building. And he's like, and they have some right here down next to the river. So we're like, all right, walk us over there to see it. And we walk down, and next to the river, there's like 100 mortars buried in, and we're right off the helicopter, and we're like, oh, okay, so there's gonna be some stuff in this area if there's this big of a cache just out in the middle of nowhere. And so, he basically points to the compound that we're planning on hitting, the big one that we knew the prior ODA was trying to get into, and says, yeah, this is where all the Taliban keep their stuff. And so we start moving in, and most of the Taliban fled early, right? They heard the aircraft coming, which was a very typical thing. If they're not willing to fight for what's there, they'll just get on their motorcycles and just bounce once they hear the aircraft. So we pretty quickly just walked straight up to the main compound. My element, again, is the one, we're split up, but my element is the one that's, and I'm element leader again on this one. My element's the one that's going to this compound. And so we pretty much freely get into this compound, no resistance. And it's a big open compound, maybe 50 meters by 50 meters of open space with, buildings around it. And, there's cars and stuff in the middle of this compound, and I'm not thinking much of it. And we're like, oh man, maybe there's really not that much in here. And then all of a sudden my EOD tech comes up on the radio and he was like, hey, you need to come look at this. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And he's like, come over here by this giant building. So I walk over and he's standing, in just a normal doorway, and he's like, come and look at this. And I go and I look in the door, and it's a warehouse, and it's from, ground to 10 feet tall of HME, as 100 feet wide. And it's like, and you're standing next to it like, okay, if this goes off, all of us are going to be vaporized instantly. So it's like, oh, I really hope this isn't rigged, because all of us are going to die immediately if there's somebody with a clacker standing 100 meters away. And it's, I had seen we found tons of really big caches, but I mean, nothing like this. This was absolutely insane. Again, it was the largest one ever found by any U.S. military in Afghanistan. So again, it was like a warehouse full of bags of HME. And it wasn't just HME. They had probably hundreds of mortars and rockets and ammunition. I mean, it was massive stockpile. So we're like, okay, well, great. We're going to blow this up. So we call it up to the SODIF and tell them what we found. And as we're doing this, we start looking in the cars that are in here, and we're looking in the car's flashlight, and we're like, oh, that's a V-bed. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's another V-bed. Mm-hmm. These are all rigged. And we're like, holy shit. Like, this compound is this is the most death-centered place we could be for explosives in Afghanistan. If something goes boom, you got 50 dead soldiers instantly. So we call it up, and we're gonna first try to get. We first are like, well, they're gonna strike it, right? There's no way that we're gonna leave this here. Right. And so they're like, yeah, cordon off the area and make sure nobody comes in and out, and then we'll strike it and we'll get rid of it. So that's what we do. We spend the next couple hours making sure we clear everything. There's no one inside these compounds. There's no one near it. We have the whole area cordoned off, and then we wait. And we wait. And 2 a.m. rolls around, 3 a.m. rolls around, 4 a.m. rolls around. And we're in a valley in Tarin Kot, which is like, you don't stay there into daylight. Because if you stay in there to the daylight, you start taking rockets and mortars from the hills. So we're like, are you going to strike or not? Like, what are we doing? And then finally they tell us, they're like, oh, well, we can't strike. So then we're like, well, we'll just bip it ourselves, right? We'll blow it up ourselves. And they're like, no, you can't do that. Maybe there was a mosque. I don't know. But we're like, what are you talking about? We can't do this. We can't leave 13,000 pounds of HME on target for them to kill American soldiers with for the next 10 years. This is insane. Yeah. And they're like, well, stand by. And then eventually, 5 a.m. rolls around and the helicopters show up, and we get on the helicopters and we leave. And everybody's looking around at each other like, what the hell are we doing? We had the whole area cordoned off. It's all taken care of. So obviously we're confused. We're pissed. Right? Like, for one, I didn't just walk around this area that was just guaranteed death for 2 hours for us to just leave it there. Right. And so we get back, everybody's pissed. We, there's no gunfights, anything like that on this mission. And so, we do our AARs, we go to sleep, we wake up the next morning, and we come to do our team meeting, and our team sergeant's like, hey, General called and got some news for you guys. We have to fly back in and hit this target again. So apparently what happened, and again, I don't know for sure, but the general who had the authorities to strike this target was asleep, and his aides didn't want to wake him up. So that's why we didn't strike the target. Well, when the general woke up the next morning and he saw the mission brief and said, why the fuck didn't you guys wake me up? We can't leave, just like we said, we can't leave the enemy all of this. Go back and get it. Right. So the general takes the risk of sending us back into the largest cache ever found that they could potentially rig to kill us all again.
That was very brave of him to take that risk.
Yeah, that's what we said. That's the very first thing we said. We're like, oh man, you are so brave.
Because you guys leave, and first off, you guys. So when we're talking about HME, you're talking about homemade explosive, right?
Yep.
Yep. What was the nature of the homemade explosives? Because we're talking about, are we talking about IEDs, or it's not a finished product?
No,
project?
so it was more of the now again, I'm not an engineer, but more of like the fertilizer based explosive, right? Like it's an explosive, but it hasn't been turned into an IED yet.
Right.
It's just the actual explosive material that they have bagged up in big 50-pound bags.
And the fact that it wasn't rigged the first time.
Oh yeah.
Against you guys, and then you're going back in there after you've already told the Taliban that we know this is here, and that it's not rigged again. It's so lucky.
So the SOTF did hold air assets above the target, and they struck anyone who got anywhere near it throughout the day.
Okay.
Throughout the night. So they did do that, right? Because otherwise we would have been like, no, that's just guaranteed death. But still, you never know, right? You never know if it wasn't already rigged.
Right.
And then now they realize somebody, who's in the area says, okay, now I get on my cell phone and wait for him to come back, and boom. But like with everything, we got a bunch of we all got ARCOM with combat devices, right? So they gave us big flashy awards for our bravery on that one. They had to make up. Oh, and they gave our team leader a Valor award for that mission, which he tried to turn down because he was like, I'm not accepting a Valor award. And he was like 600 meters away from the whole thing the whole time. He's like, I'm not accepting a Valor award for this. And, the command was like, oh, yes, you are, because we're not going to have this look like a mistake. You know what I mean? You're going to be brave.
So when you guys went back in that second night, did you have to did you just have to coordinate, or did you have to go back to the warehouse and reconfirm?
Well, so we went back in the same night, and they still wouldn't strike it. Oh, they sent us back in, and we had to internally BIP it. It was like,
so you guys had the thing too. You guys had to blow it in place?
We had to blow it. Yeah, they wouldn't even strike it, so we didn't cordon it or anything. So they sent us back in, and they were like, "Well, we don't want to take the risk of striking it. You guys go do it." So yeah, our EOD techs and our Charlies went in, and they rigged this warehouse with C4 and everything, and put a massive delayed fuse on it, and they popped it, and everybody ran 500 meters. And it's crazy when this thing went off, and it's too bad we can't show the video of it. When this thing went off, it looks like a nuclear bomb going off in the NATO video, but I remember, because we're in a valley, I was probably 700 meters away from this explosion, and I could feel it in my chest like it was a door charge in CQB.
That's crazy.
That's how big that explosion was, So it was intense, for sure.
We have the video?
Yeah, I sent it to you guys on Instagram.
Yeah.
If you can...
we'll throw it on the Patreon.
The video of it?
Yeah. Yeah,
but you guys have the video of the ISR after we bit that. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, after we saw that video, it was like, oh, and you can see, in that video, you'll see, you don't realize it's like, oh, these are tiny buildings, and it's like engulfed by this atomic bomb cloud, and it's like, oh, that would have been us as little ants next to that had this thing gone off.
Yeah. Did you guys also bip the vehicles, or did that charge take them out?
No, it blew 400 meters of compound, disintegrated. Everything inside of that thing was absolutely gone from that much explosive.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's so wild that you guys were sent back in there instead of just basically doing an airstrike and calling it a day.
Well, and super irresponsible.
Yeah.
And I can say that now that I'm out. But I mean, the fact that you would send us back into that, is for the fact that you made a whoopsie. Like, just strike it, man.
Yeah.
Like, you've been watching it the whole night. Nobody's come into the area. We had it cordoned off, right? The ISR has been watching the whole. But they'd rather send in a team full of SF guys than take the risk of somebody getting in trouble for something like that. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Now, what did you guys do about the mortars down by the river?
Oh, we bit those. Yeah, we blew those up just as we went through.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a few different little caches on the way as we got there that we just dipped in place.
Yeah.
But yeah, cache wise, we would find stuff like that all over the place. We probably found like 100 different caches throughout all those different missions that we would just dip in place. And with that, I wanted to say this because I always forget to talk about it, which always pissed you off, is all these caches were always American ammunitions. It was American mortars. It was American ammo, still sealed, serialized in the green, the green boxes. And it's like, oh, cool. Wonder how the Taliban are getting all of this, So, but I mean, they got plenty of it now too, though. So I guess
yeah. That is interesting though, because I mean, how do you think that it was Indige working on base, like funneling it out to them?
Well, I can tell you, I do know how it is, right? So what it is that, a lot of people don't realize in Afghanistan, the whole Taliban ANA thing is not as like black and white as people think it is. There's a lot of like, I'm Taliban one day and I'm ANA the next, right? And whatever suits me best is where I'm at. So for example, tons of missions, we would hit Taliban villages and there would be multiple ANA police cars parked at the compound, hanging out with their Taliban buddies. So what I think more of what it was is, we supplied the ANA with all this ammunition and all these mortars and all these rockets, and then they would just turn around and sell it to the Taliban. I think that's more of how that whole thing played out.
So in 2018, did you guys ever find any night vision, whether it was American or commercial? Like, did they have that?
Yeah, so the Taliban Red Unit guys had it, which we found a few of those. On the mission, the final mission I'll talk about was Taliban Red Unit guys that we ended up getting in big fights with. So, but that was the only Taliban that had night vision that we came across. Was it military, American military, or was it like store-bought commercial? Yeah, so we didn't see any American military, but the big thing too is that the Taliban Red Unit, unless they got trapped, which in this mission I'm talking about, we trapped them bad, they would not fight American forces, right? Because they didn't want to give up all the Gucci equipment, right? So they would really only fight the ANA. So we really didn't come across them that much for that reason.
That's it's crazy because it makes all the difference. Like if the guys who ambushed you from that compound, if they would have had night vision,
I'd be dead.
It'd be different. Like
I'd be dead. We'd all be dead. Everybody in that field would be dead.
They would have hit you when you're in the field, not when you were like 10 meters away.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the only reason we're alive is they didn't have night.
Yeah.
And you can't be in an open field and get ambushed from a compound. If that was us with night vision in that compound, we would have killed everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So then after this and your team leader gets his Valor award, and mad respect to him for wanting to decline it.
Oh, he's a awesome dude. One of the highest ranked officers in the Special Forces Regiment, right? Great dude, great commander. And that was his thing. And especially because, the entire team had gotten Valor awards for everything that had happened. And that was his thing, was like, for one, he didn't care, right?
Right.
And for him, it was like, what? He was pissed too, because it was like, why are you sending my guys back in to do this? And now you're trying to like make it all kosher by giving me a Valor award. Definitely didn't sit right with him, but.
So do ARCOMs have V devices now?
Yeah, so that's what we all ended up getting, right? So we were all put in for, besides my 18 Delta who got the Silver Star, we were all put in for Bronze Stars with Valor. And the way the Valor award system works is you get put in for the Valor award, and then it goes to your local chain of command, your company. They have to agree. The citation goes through. It goes to your battalion command. They agree. It goes up to the SOTF command. They agree. Then it goes to a board of sergeant majors who look it over, and they can agree or downgrade, right? And then it goes to the 1-star general. So each general can sign off on a certain level of Valor Award. So the 1-star can sign off on a ARCOM V, the 2-star, Bronze Star would be a Silver Star. I think it's the 4-star. Medal of Honor goes to the president, right? So, so what had happened was our BSMVs, and this was my whole team, all went through all the way up past the Board of Sergeant Majors. Everybody agrees, Bronze Star with Valor. Gets to the 1-star general, who has the authority to either pass the Bronze Star up to the 2-star, or he, by himself, with no other person, can say, no, I'm just going to downgrade these to ARCOM V at my level. Boom, sign them. Here's your ARCOM V. So that's what he did to our ODA, is he said, no, I'm not going to send them further. I'm just going to downgrade them right here at my level. Sign. Here you go. So, you know, it was kind of a shitty thing to do to us, but at the same time, for me, you know, the important thing for me was more of like, one, it's just an honor that I was with my teammates,
Sure.
To be a part of that. And, you know, some of the things I watched my teammates do were, in my opinion, so much more heroic than what I did that, again, it just meant a lot to me that I was a part of that. And then also the recognition sort of for my family and like my kids, when they grow up, they'll be able to, you know, see something like that. So, you know, the level of Valor Award never really mattered to me. I don't really care. But it's still kind of one of those shitty things that an officer just decides on his own, that a bunch of NCOs like, nah, I'm just going to downgrade your stuff and sign it. But
I
that's
honestly did not know that the ARMCOM had a V device, but I guess it's been around for a while. But yeah, it is very shitty. I mean, it's like, why like it's not money out of his pocket. It doesn't cost him anything to sign off on that. He just randomly reads it and goes, nah, not these guys.
Yeah, you know, we said the same thing. And what's funny is, you know, you would read like Bronze Star with Valor citations from the 10th group team before us.
Yeah.
You know, we read those citations, and no knock on those guys, right? They had awesome stuff. But you read those citations and be like, well, these near ambushes were 10 times crazier than those awards.
Yeah.
And yet ours are, and you know, the worst part was we had the SOTF commander come and see us afterwards. And he was like, you guys only got put in for Bronze Stars with Valor for that?
Yeah.
He's like, you guys should all have Silver Stars.
Yeah.
You know, but then they turn around and knock us all down, but you know, whatever, you know.
But you know, I mean, even, you know, like, and your dad can probably speak to this, and you know, we've had a lot of guys from SF and MACV-SOG on the show from Vietnam, and it's in those small units when the whole unit is doing something very valorous, you know, that it's not looked at in the same way as an individual in a line company, you know, doing the, you know, one person standing out will get recognized, and not always recognized. Like they get their medals downgraded a lot too. But it's weird how the military looks at small units who are under duress and doing these uncommon acts of valor, basically.
Yeah. You know, and we would always get told, you know, and there's a big thing. SOF operators, typically, you know, what you get a Valor Award for might be a Bronze Star, and that same thing for someone in the infantry is a Medal of Honor. And that's the reality of it, because the way that the military says is, you know, you're just doing your job. Your job is to do extraordinary things.
Right.
You did your job. Why would we give you, you know, anything above and beyond that?
Right.
So.
Right. And, you know, and for your Delta to be wounded, to charge a machine gun nest, like that is the definition, I think, of what, you know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, you get injured, you save lives, you eliminate the threat in a machine gun nest in that situation. It's all of those things. You know what I mean? But he's an 18 Delta Green Beret, so that's a Silver Star. It's not a Valor Award, or that's not a Medal of Honor, I guess.
You know,
I don't agree with it.
Chances are, though, when he's 90, they'll turn around and upgrade it. They just don't want to, you know, they just don't want to pay the kids for college and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure.
So So you guys have now bipped this. You exfil. Like, what's next on the agenda for you guys?
Yeah. So again, we have some, I don't want to say normal missions because we had a lot of wild stuff that happened, but I just like to hit the big ones that are exciting and fun to talk about. So the last one, or the third biggest kind of coolest mission that we had was a mission where a Taliban compound was being overrun, or not, excuse me, an ANA compound was being overrun by the Taliban in a place called Camp Anaconda in Khaz-Aruzgan. And what made this sort of a really high-profile mission is that Khaz-Aruzgan, which was east of Aruzgan, was outside of the med rings of anything that we could go to. So for people who don't know, you have your golden hour of medical coverage that we don't really operate outside of in the event that somebody gets injured. So Khaz-Aruzgan, no SF, no American military had ever been in here, ever. So that's how far out it was and austere it was. And so this Camp Anaconda, the ANA had been basically getting overrun. They couldn't get any supplies in. They had all these dead soldiers. They couldn't get them out. And our partner force basically asked us if we'd be willing to go in and help this compound. And we were able to, which we were like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. We get to go outside the med ring. We get to, this compound's under attack. We know we're going to get into some nasty stuff. And the general, he's into blessing off on risk. So he was willing to take the risk to send us way outside the med ring. And we had to set up with the 160th of we had surgeons, sort of forward placed on CH-47s inside, within the med ring. So we had to build that whole apparatus for us to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we get blessed off to come in and basically hit this. Well, the way it worked is, so there was a compound that ANA had, which on one side of it, there was a big mountain on the back side of it. And then, let's say the north side of it was a big mountain range. And then it was right at the base of the mountain range. And then the south side was sort of grass, shrubbery lands. And so the ANA guys were stuck in the compound up next to that mountain range, and the Taliban had built a bunch of bunkers and DFPs, and basically were assaulting through this area to attack the compound. And there was nowhere for the ANA to go; they were completely stuck. So, we got briefed from the ANA guys about where the compound was and where the Taliban were. So we got some pretty good intel on it, and so we decided, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to infill behind where the Taliban are, and we're just going to pincer the Taliban in between Camp Anaconda and us. And there's going to be nowhere for them to go. They're just going to have to fight us. So that was the plan as we went in. And so I'll just kind of walk through the mission. We got a lot of. Go ahead if you need to stop me.
Yeah. So was it all open terrain? Was it wooded? Like outside of that kind of open area where they had built their fighting positions, what was the terrain behind them like?
So Khaz-Aruzgan more vegetative than you would think in Afghanistan, much higher elevation as well. So think of it as like high grasslands.
Okay.
Sort of grass up to your waist with intermittent, pretty large trees, and then sort of open areas in between that, right? Okay. Sort of kind of like Washington, Oregon type of vegetation. Not your typical, Kandahar desert dirt, more of a vegetative, large forested sort of type of environment.
Okay.
So we fly in and we offset quite a bit because we don't want them to know that it's Americans, right? Because we know no Americans have ever been in there. But we do know that they have been basically trying to shoot down any ANA helicopter that comes in. Uh-huh. So they've been used to the ANA trying to fly in and not be able to get in. So we want to basically make them think that, hey, this is ANA helicopters trying to get in. So we have the helicopters first fly in, and then fly over the top, have them get shot at, not us, but our Apaches, and then fly off. And then we sort of kind of like a false infill.
Yeah.
And then we fly in right after that to make the Taliban think, oh, that was just ANA helicopters. And so we fly in, we hit the ground, and immediately, I mean, within the first couple minutes, we start getting the chatter on the Terp phones, you know, and the ISR of the Taliban going, oh, that, you know, that the ANA are here. They're trying to get their friends out. Let's go get them. Let's go get them. So we're like, oh man, these guys have no idea. You know, we've got our full ODA. We've got 60 Afghans. We've got, and again, there's a mountain range right here on the wall. So we're able to hold our AC-130 and all our air assets right on the other side of that mountain range. So they can't hear the typical big brother in the sky.
Right.
So they
the
don't
lawnmower.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't know that because they know the sound of that. So they don't know that we got that because of the terrain. So, so we get to our very first compound, and our CCT who's talking to the pilots is like, hey, the pilots just said that there's 30 guys in rank and file columns walking through the open towards us, right? So they're basically an infantry line, 30 Taliban, hutting their way to take down these ANA soldiers they think that just flew in. And so our commander and our CCT are like, all right, bring in the AC-130. And so, you know, we're 5-10 minutes into the operation, and right up over the top of the mountain range, the AC-130 hits orbit and just, you know, smokes all 30 of them. And immediately you hear over the Terp phones of screaming, oh God, it's the Americans, it's the Americans, it's the Americans. So that's how that operation starts, right? So now, but now, you know, they're like, oh God, these Americans are here. So now they're not out in the open. Now they're bunkering down. So they had built all these bunkers and defensive fighting positions so that they could fight out of towards the Taliban camp. So we had to still clear from where we were all the way to the ANA camp, because we were also going to exfil all the dead bodies of our ANA partner force. So it was like 10 guys that were dead that they couldn't get out. That was part of what we were trying to help them do. So we had to get all the way there and eliminate everybody in between. So the very first situation we get into, the first big compound we're about to try to get into, the AC-130 had struck a bunker maybe 30 meters offset from this giant compound. And so we were trying to get access to this compound, walking around. Finally, we found the gate to get in, and we're all standing on the side of the compound as we're waiting to get in. I think I'm element leader on this one too. I get my guys inside, and I send out a BDA search, so battle damage assessment search, with one of my ODA guys, two of my ODA guys, and some Afghans. I'm like, hey, can you guys go clear that bunker real quick that the AC-130 struck, just to make sure we know what we got? They're like, cool. They go walking out to go do it, and then out of nowhere, boom, machine gun fire, PKM fire everywhere. So apparently, you know, there was 4 or 5 guys in this bunker. The AC-130 killed the guys on the outside of it, but they're still bunkered in. So our two teammates are grabbing grenades and throwing them inside these bunkers, World War II style, end up killing those guys. But that was sort of the first realization of like, oh shit, these guys are in these bunkers. Like, they are, no shit, World War II style, bunkered in towards the objective. So that was sort of the realization of like, oh shit, we can't just walk like out in the open at these bunkers. There's people inside. So so again, we're continuing to clear towards the compound, and we get to the second big compound, and again, we're going through maybe like 100 meters of open area, again, with like waist-high grass as we get from compound to compound. And so we're maybe halfway there to the Camp Anaconda. Nothing really too bad has happened at this point, other than, you know, doing BDAs on bunkers. And my team sergeant's like, hey, I need you to get to the final compound. That's sort of the last compound in between the compound and the Camp Anaconda. So I'm like, all right, well, we got to clear through this open area to get there. So I get my guys, my Afghans, ready to go, and they go walking outside the compound, and we get ready to move. And as I get to the wall, they all come sprinting back at me and run back inside the compound. And I'm like, whoa, what are you guys doing? We got to clear this area. And they're like, no way. My Afghans are like, no way. We are not moving through that. And I'm like, what do you mean? Why? And they're like, you look. And so I go and I look my head out and I look at this big open area. And I mean, it is, they built the bunkers out of dirt and mud, but it's waist high grass, right? With giant bunker, but every 10 feet, a huge bunker, right? So you're looking at this and you're like, there could be people anywhere in this waist high grass.
Yeah.
There's bunkers everywhere. We know there's people in these bunkers. So the Afghans are like, no way, we're not walking through that. You're crazy. And I'm like, oh, I don't really want to walk through that either. But we've got to clear through it. So, you know, I go to my team sergeant and I'm like, I don't know what to do. The Afghans, and we have the Afghan and the ANASF guys, and they're like, no way, this is crazy. And so my team sergeant's like, and the funny thing in SF, anytime there's like a problem that's unsolvable, people always tell you, you're a Green Beret, figure it out. So this was like the ultimate moment in my career of like, you're a Green Beret, figure it out, right? So my team sergeant's like, well, I don't know, man, figure it out. And I'm like, oh, okay, how do I do this, right? So I look at my imagery, and I'm looking out, and now I've got on a second story of a compound, and I'm looking out at these bunkers, and I'm like, oh, how do I do this? But I realize as I'm looking at the bunkers, all the doorways and their shooting holes they have set up or face towards the camp. So I realized, well, we could clear this east to west and basically walk through this bunker field without them having any eyesight or access to us as we walk up to the bunkers. And so I guess I think it's a good plan. So I brief my Afghans and I'm like, hey, what when we do this? There's no way we're going to get shot if we do this. And the Afghans are like, all right, we'll do it. And so I'm like, okay, here we go. So me and my teammate and 10 Afghans, we come walking out the compound from the backside now. And I walk around the corner, and again, it's like Vietnam grass up to your chest with these bunkers. And I'm like, this is the sketchiest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? I know there's people everywhere. At any moment, anybody could pop up and start shooting. And we get the whole element out into the grass. And as soon as we get out into the grass, machine gun fire from across the way, blast out of nowhere. And then our other element to our left is firing back at machine guns, machine gun fire crazy. They actually aren't shooting at us, but we don't know that, right? So because we had just come out into the open, it's actually the Taliban shooting at our other element and them shooting back. So we go running back around the corner, like, oh shit, we're not running out into that bunker field yet.
Right.
But, kind of like cowards with our tails between our legs, just because this is it's like World War II, for real. It's like, this is so sketchy.
I would say more prudent than cowardice, Yeah.
But you're like, okay, so, we compose ourselves and we're like, shit, all right, okay, we can do this. They're not shooting at us. And so we walk out again and, I have 2 ANASF guys that are with me out front, and one of them who, this guy, when I talked earlier about some of these ANASF guys who were crazy, this dude, his story, basically, he had been fighting in the ANASF for 15 years. Taliban came to his village when he was 6 or 7 years old and murdered his entire family in front of him. So all he cared about was killing Taliban. And he was our point man for this movement. And so he would walk, we're walking out, we get to the first bunker, and I may be 10 feet away, and he just walks straight up to the bunker, because again, with the way the holes are, they can't see us. He walks up to the bunker, he looks in, jumps his head out, and looks back at me, and he goes, there's people in here. And I'm like, well, okay, kill him, I guess. And so, he grabs his grenades and he throws them in and blows up the bunker, and we end up clearing through probably like 5, 6, 7 more bunkers that way, of these ANASF guys just walking up to the bunkers, looking inside. Oh God, and grenades and throwing them in, and eventually clearing through, this whole area that way, which was, again, combat is sketchy in general, but that was definitely the sketchiest thing I'd ever done. But anyway, so we we get through this bunker field and we finally make it to our last compound. And then our other element, you know, they have to make the same trek, right? And they have to do it through on their side. And we eventually, you know, clear all the way through. And at this point, we've just eliminated all these Taliban. And anyway, so I was getting with that. They were Taliban red unit guys. So we found a bunch of NVGs. And also, we knew they were Taliban red unit because they Gucci their guns. So their AKs, they flare them out with all kinds of crazy ribbons and like, you know, like
flowers.
They have, like, yeah. So it's like one of those things where like sort of that Arab, like, you know, you go into an Arab convenience store, how flashy it is.
Yeah.
So they do that with their AKs and everything. So all the guns we were finding were, you know, Gucci'd out and crazy. But
something we've never talked about the red unit on this show, and I think it was something that happened later on in the war. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically Taliban red unit were sort you could think of the Taliban special forces, right? And they were guys that were being equipped, well, we don't know for sure, but equipped from Iran most likely, and then potentially Pakistan. But they were pretty much exclusively through the southern part of Afghanistan, at least while we were there. And again, they used them primarily to really hit the ANA hard, right? So they would use their Taliban soft guys to nail ANA checkpoints and like really cause sort of, you know, UW havoc on the ANA through the south. So that was really their purpose. And they were far better equipped. They had body armor, they had night vision, they had all the Gucci equipment. Far so, you know, they weren't just regular Taliban villagers that were, you know, fighting at the lowest levels. These guys were organized, they were equipped, they were funded. And again, they didn't want to fight the United States and they didn't want to fight U.S. soft. They were there to, you know, really cause damage and havoc to the ANA, who had, you know, no chance at fighting guys like that.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's funny that, you know, you mentioned how they sort of like Gucci out their gear, because when you think of like U.S. soft, if I'm going to Gucci my gear, like you have a 416 upper, you do the camo paint on it, like you do that.
Yeah.
For them, it's like bedazzling it, putting ribbons and flowers.
Bedazzled, that's
it's
the perfect word for that.
Yeah, it's a strange sort of comparison or dichotomy, you know, what they consider like gold, like if they could afford it, they gold plate it.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right? So we thought a little bit of that, but yeah, the big, like the ribbons, the fancy colors, like, you know, peacock type of stuff coming off their AKs. Yeah. That's how you could tell that you had, you know, higher level tier guys that you're fighting with.
But it's funny because even their personal photos, and I don't mean the red unit, I mean like Afghan or like their personal photos are generally in a field of flowers, or they're like that soft light old, like you know, family portrait style. You know, it's interesting. It's an interesting contrast.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and it's funny because when you talk about like this waist high grass and these bunkers, I think back, you know, obviously like your dad was in Vietnam. I think back, it's like, boy, it's too bad we stopped using napalm, because that's a perfect like environment for napalm, right? Just burn that grass out. And
we actually talked about that because that was one of the things before. Again, this wasn't like a 3-minute thing where I figured out a plan to move to this bunker. This was like a 30-minute thing of me trying to figure out how to get these guys to agree with that. And part of that was, you know, hey, can we get air to basically just blow this bunker field out and strike it? Yeah. The problem was we could have technically, but at that time, both our A-10s and our Apaches had to go off station to refuel. So all we had was F-15s, and the F-15s were like, dude, we're not gonna strike an area, you know, 20 meters away from you guys.
Like everything's danger close at that point for them. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did have them do a show of force. The only time I ever had F-15s do a show of force over the top of us right before we went out to move, which was, I mean, that was actually insane if anybody hasn't had that done, where they come down about 100 feet off the ground, the F-15s, and then they they punch their mock right as they go over the top of you. And I mean, it's like the shockwave blows out and almost blows your eardrums out if you're not ready. But that was the best we could get, before we moved, because all our actual assets that could strike close like that were off station. So, yeah.
So at any point in time when you or, the other element, when you guys were moving forward, clearing these bunkers, with grenades, did they ever did they ever catch on to what was going on?
Not really. I think that they were so, having like 30 other dudes immediately smoked right out the gate. Mm-hmm. I think, I think that it was just chaos for them. I think it was basically hide in the bunkers. And it was panic big time, right? Because they thought, they had controlled this area and they were just kicking the shit out of the ANA for the last month.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and then so they're coming out to, we're going to march on out and mess these guys up. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh shit, the full might of the American military and SOF is here. And what is left of who we have is now in these bunkers. Probably communications gone at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that they were just completely disheveled to the point of trying to hide and just survive at that point because of that.
The other thing is, once that AC 130 like comes in, comes over the mountain, they can hear it. It's like that lawnmower in the sky. Like they know what that means, right?
Everybody, yeah. The ANA knows, the Taliban, everybody knows. They call it Big Brother, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows who Big Brother is. As soon as, and that's why that mountain range was so awesome, is that we were able to keep our aircraft, within strike distance, but just right on the other side of that mountain range, to where they just had to come right up over the top. They're in orbit, and boom. So.
Yeah. That's amazing. So once you guys clear this and you move forward to the ANA compound, like what happens? They're obviously relieved, right?
Yeah. So, oh man. Yeah, for sure. So we cleared through that. We get to the compound, and then, we go in, we meet all the guys, and we get all their wounded out, and then all their dead, which we then had to basically carry out and exfil out, which I think they had like 9 or 10 bodies, which had been there a long, long time. But yeah, so we got those on helicopters and got all those guys out of there. And, that camp was fine after that, because the Taliban, they bailed out of that area. They were like, oh God, the Americans are willing to fight. But it gained us such massive appreciation with our partner force,
right?
More so than anything else that we did. That was a huge deal for that relationship between us and our third SOC commandos, that we did that for them, which was cool to be able to do that too, because you can imagine from those guys in that camp's perspective that are just trying to survive. Your buddies are dead everywhere around you. There's nothing left for you to do. You're struggling to hang on, and then we show up and kill everybody that's been, smoking your unit for the last month, and get your guys out. So
yeah, that
was definitely a really cool thing to be a part of.
What was it sketchy when you guys were approaching the ANA combat? How did you deconflict so that they didn't fire you up?
Not really, because they had our ANA guys had comms with their guys in the compound.
Okay.
From pretty much the time we hit the ground. So yeah, they knew. So we had cleared through. We didn't clear straight up to the compound. We cleared to the final sort of compound the Taliban had controlled, which was like another 100 meters away from the compound. And then basically radio had the team leaders, and we had the Afghans obviously lead and go get the dead bodies and whatnot.
Yeah.
We didn't go with them into the compound, but yeah, they had comms with their own guys. So that wasn't really any problem at all.
Now, do you guys, did ISR pick up, did anybody exfil from that area into the Taliban? Do you know that you got all the bunkers?
So we definitely had dudes, after the AC-130 struck that initial engagement. Yeah, there was guys leaving that area.
Like, peace out.
Oh yeah, all over. It was from the fringes.
Yeah.
They were gone, but all those guys who were basically bunkered in that were attacking the ANA compound, there was nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
There was nowhere to run to. But the guys on the fringes, yeah, they bailed and they got on their motorcycles. Everybody was gone as soon as they heard the AC 130 and the big 105s come in. It was like, if you can get out, get out.
Yeah.
For sure.
So how did that, so your Afghans go in, they recover the bodies. How did that operation end for you guys?
Yeah. So, interesting way that ended. So yeah, we brought all the bodies out. There was a big open field that sort of we had to move through as we went through the compounds, but it was a good place to bring our helicopters in. And interesting with that. So we had 2 Chinooks and I think 3 Blackhawks. We had an extra Blackhawk come in to be able to help bring the bodies out. And they all came in sort of at the same time. And my element, where we were posted up, we watch all the helicopters come in and land, and then no CH-47 lands in front of us. And so, I'm looking around like, okay, we're missing one, you know what I mean? And watching, and we do these things quick, right? The helicopters hit the ground, you get on the helicopter, you leave. And so I'm watching that, and then up they go, and all of a sudden all the helicopters are in the air, and my element is just standing on the ground, and we're in enemy territory, right? This is a place where we're way outside the med ring. So it's like, this is not a place we want to get left. But apparently whatever this last Chinook, he was like a kilometer away in an open field by himself for whatever reason. But so luckily I was able to still talk to my commander on my radio of like, hey man, nobody has picked us up. So all the other helicopters loitered, and we're able to talk on the final helicopter to come by and actually pick our element up like 10 minutes later. But it was like, okay, this is super sketchy. This is a dangerous area, which we know Taliban are in the area. But I think they had, again, we just talked about, they had all bailed out of the area, so it wasn't that dangerous. But it's still kind of like, okay, we really don't want to get left.
Yeah.
2 hours outside of the med ring.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that pilot maybe was the student driver or whatever. Like,
yeah, I don't know. We had some, the 160th is one thing, but those guys are amazing. But some of our regular Army pilots, some of the stuff we saw was like, man, just an aside. This is from just talking about Chinook pilots. From a mission that really didn't have much happen to it at all. But at the very end, when we were getting picked up, kind of one of the crazier things that happened in our deployment. Same thing. So all our elements we're getting ready to exfil. We're in our, line of 20 guys standing in line. CCT is IR roping in the CH-47s on the ground. We're watching, we got 2 CH-47s coming in right at us, 2 elements side by side. The first CH-47, it comes in, lands 50 meters in front of the element, just perfect. And then we're watching our CH-47, and we're like, man, he's still really, really high up in the air. Like, why is he not coming in? And then it's getting closer and closer and closer to us. And we start to realize, like, okay, he's going to fly, and it looks like almost right on top of us. And by the time we realize it, we're like, oh God, he's going to land on us. And so everybody takes off running in different directions. And this CH-47 pilot comes in, he realizes he's basically going to land on top of us. And he yanks his pitch to not land to the point. And so we're kind of at the bottom of a hill like this right here, right? So we're sitting down here. And so he yanks his pitch to not land now. And so his back rotors smack off the ground where we're just standing, rakes the ground, which would have killed everybody had they ever not all just jumped out of the way. And then his rotors hitting it launches him upright, and he almost tea kettles the entire CH-47 up on top of itself, and then barely manages to get it back up to get around to come and get us. But just an aside for some of the crazier things you see some of those pilots.
Do you think that was mostly an experience? Was there a brownout because the other bird had already been in, or?
Yeah, so we, in the Kandahar area and Helmand area, like brownouts are like every single landing, just because it's the way the terrain is.
Yeah.
So the inexperienced pilots really, really struggle with the brownouts. The experienced pilots are so used to it that they just
Yeah.
let their instrument tell them what to do. They land. They don't really care.
Yeah.
But the inexperienced pilots, for sure, those brownouts can cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember I flew with the Marines, like a Marine Force recon team once, and we were on the Marine Birds, and as they were landing, I was like, like the rear seems really, it seems like it's down, like like we're not landing level. And I was thinking this is just how these birds land. I don't know. But I look around all like the Marines, and their eyes are all like this big, and I'm like, oh, this isn't how they land at all.
No, I think, in the brownouts, that's really common too. You'll see that where like it'll start to tilt and the ramp will be like more and more like they're trying to get the butt of the ramp to touch so they feel better about it. But you're looking out the back like, okay, this is not good.
Yeah. I mean, and to be fair to helicopter pilots, like it's a very challenging environment to fly in.
Oh, for sure. And it's not just, it's night. They're under night vision. They're dealing with instruments. It's a brownout.
Yep.
They're worried about getting shot down by an RPG from who knows where.
Yep.
So they got all that going on at the same time. And, a lot of those guys, I'm sure it's, probably their first combat rotation. They're actually flying for real, so the stress of that on top of it.
Yeah. And for people who might not know, I know a lot of you do, but for people who might not know, a brownout is simply when a helicopter is coming in, obviously it's kicking up a lot of air, a lot of dust. And in places like Afghanistan, where the dust is just, it's like silt sometimes. It's like talcum powder in some places. And it creates a brownout where they can't see anything. And they're on pure instruments. I mean,
it's almost like moon dust.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
It's like,
and you're right. I mean, there's no vision at all. Sometimes we'll jump off the back and it's like I'm going to run 20 feet in front of me and
face
get
out
on my knee.
Wait,
and just wait because you can't see anything.
Yeah. But moon dust is really, it's like you step in it. It's like, pff, like I said, it's like talcum powder, just like puffs everywhere. So
for sure.
Were there any like significant operations for you guys? Any fun operations for you guys after that one?
I mean, those are, again, there's most of the other operations have like little bits or pieces that are cool or fun, but those were three of the biggest ones. Again, we had another operation just for talking about. It wasn't that cool because we didn't really get any gunfights, but we found the number 9 most wanted Taliban on the JPITL list at the time. Objective Ice Pick, I think his name was at the time. So for people who don't know, we rack, and the U.S. government racks and stacks, the most wanted terrorists in areas. So that was that mission we didn't have any. It was kind of we infilled. Nobody wanted to fight, and it just happened that we found the guy that we were looking for. So nothing exciting there. The result was cool, but yeah, I could talk briefly about my very first combat operation and some of the ridiculousness that happened. That's kind of funny.
Please do.
If you wanted to hear that. Yeah.
Please
so my very first combat operation, right? So again, my very first one, we fly in on the 160th and we land on the target, and we're in an area in Aruzgan that looks like Jesus Christ lived there. I mean, it is mud huts, 2000 BC, rural type of environment, right? There is no green anywhere you look. It's 10 foot tall, dried out mud walls, sort of like the face of the moon type of things. Every compound wall has murder holes in it as far as you can look. So we hit the X, we jump off. I'm not an element leader at this point. It's my first mission. My buddy is. And then, so there's some really funny, this has really got really funny stuff that goes with it. We got in a gunfight at the end, but more funny stuff. So right out the gate, we're riding in the 160th. And so these guys don't mess around. They fly map of the earth, which for those who don't know, It's right off the top of the surface of the earth. They fly it the whole way. They fly in fast. They drop. You jump off the aircraft, and they're gone. There's no messing around. So we hit the X. We jump off. They take off. I look up. There's a compound right in front of us, and immediately we have my team leaders with me, our commander, and no, he's not. He's not with us. He's in the other element, and he's in the other element, and we have our CCT with us. And so, for everybody who knows, the combat controller and the team leader, the ground force commander, are always side by side because they work together for any strikes. So our CCT is with us, and our commander is 1,000 meters away, and our CCT is looking around, and he was like, "Where am I? What happened?" So I guess what happened is the other aircraft that he was supposed to be on with the team leader, when they landed, he was like trying to get unclipped from, the radio in the aircraft. He didn't do it in time. And by the time he got unclipped and looked, the 160th pilots took back off, and then they were dumping the other half of the element over with us because we sort of did a split infill. And so he gets dropped off with us. And so immediately, first operation, he's like, "Oh God, what happened? I don't know where the commander is." And so my senior medic, same guy I talked about earlier, he's like the one with so many combat deployments. He's like, "Okay, I'll take you, and I'm going to walk you across all these murder holes. First mission back to the team leader," right? So that's how that mission starts, which is just ridiculous. And so we start moving our way through these first compounds. And I mean, it's like everything out of your worst nightmare when it comes to IEDs. There are wires everywhere. You're walking through, wires are getting tangled up in your legs. Everything looks like an IED nightmare, right? So very first operation, I'm carrying, because in the plan, we're going to knock down this defensive fighting position. I'm carrying the Carl Gustav on my back with rockets, right? So which I never ever did again, right? This was a one-time thing that I did. And so I got the Carl Gustav on my back. For those who don't know, it's this big rocket launcher, and I'm carrying it around, getting tripped up in wires. And we move up, and it's maybe, we're maybe 30 minutes in. We get to this first compound that I'm supposed to knock down with my Carl Gustav, so that way, because it's a defensive fighting position, we can tell from the imagery this is an OBS. You can see it built up. And we're going to knock down a hole in the wall. That way, we can come in the side of it. We don't have to, stand out and try to breach it and deal with getting grenades thrown on us or anything like that. So, my senior 18 Delta, again, he's my AG, and we run out into the open, and he's like, "All right, man, let's shoot. Let's knock this wall down." So I run out, and again, my first combat operation ever, and I'm like, "Okay," and I'm lined up, and I'm like, "Where's the wall?" And I'm like, "Oh God," I don't know. I'm like, I'm so mixed up now. I don't know what's going on. And so he grabs me, and he's like, "Dude, it's over here." He turns me 180 degrees, lines me up onto the wall, and he's like, "Okay, let's shoot it." And I'm looking at the wall. I'm like, "Aren't we too close to this?" We still laugh about this. We're like 30 meters away from this wall with Carl Gustav. And he's like, and again, same guy who sprinted towards the bullets in the near ambush. He's like, "No, we're fine. Don't worry about it." I'm like, "Okay." And so, he puts the rocket in, I line it up, and, I clack it off, boom. And of course, the concussion basically knocks us both down because we're so close. And, dust everywhere. I get up. I'm looking at the wall, it starts to settle. And I look over at him. I'm like, "What? Did I miss? What happened?" And he's like, "No, you hit the wall." But these walls were like 2-3 feet thick of just sun-dried mud. This Carl Gustav round did nothing. It just knocked the dust off of the wall. And so we're like, oh God, what do we do? And then we look over, and our Afghans had been watching us, and they just rolled their eyes, and they just walked in the front gate of this DFP. So we're like, "Okay, well, all right." We feel pretty silly right now. So we run over and just walk in. We get inside this compound, and immediately everything I have been told in the train up for the last 9 months is we use our we had special Afghan guys, can't get into the sensitivity of it, but they would basically be mine sweeping guys for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't walk anywhere that those guys have. They walk in front of us everywhere where we walk. That's all I've been taught for the last 9 months. We get inside the compound, some stuff starts happening. My same 18 Delta, wild as can be, is like, oh, we need to get over there. And he's like, let's go. And so he just takes off running through an area that hasn't been cleared yet with no mine detector guys, and in an area that looks like there's an IED in every step you could take. And so I'm like, okay, so we take off. We're going and doing this and that. We get to this sort of half wall on a compound. And again, it's all this dirt, mud walls. And everybody's jumping over it to get to the next thing. Again, I got this giant Carl Gustav on my back. I go to step over the wall like this. The wall's like this. I go to step over it like this. And the ground beneath me falls out. And so now I'm being held up on my nuts. And I'm stuck with the Carl Gustav on the wall. And I have to have these Afghans come over and basically lift and drag me up over the top of this wall to get me out of there. So it's getting more and more ridiculous, right, as I'm carrying this stupid thing. We get a little bit further in the objective, and we had an EOD tech on our team who had like 5 or 6 combat deployments and was one of the craziest dudes I have ever seen. I don't know how he was alive anymore, and I'll tell you an example of why. So we roll up, and this was in between this and this part was when my buddy threw the thermobaric and the collapsed one of the things that blew my lips open, right? So all this stuff is happening, right? So it's just ridiculous. I'm like, this is what combat is. This is ridiculous, right? I'm struggling. I've also got this giant rocket on my back, and I'm trying to get through the doorways of these buildings. And the Afghans are small, so these buildings, they're like 4 foot tall doorways by 3 feet. So I'm 6'2" with this giant rocket launcher on my back, struggling to get through. And then we finally are getting towards the end of the objective, and we find a cache down in a basement that's just massively filled with explosives. Not massively, but quite a bit of explosives down this sort of basement. And my 18 Delta, he's like, I'm going to move on and keep clearing towards the end of the objective here. You guys go ahead. You and the EOD tech go ahead and BIP that. And so I'm like, okay. So I look down in it, and again, the basement is like, that's the most IED looking thing I've ever seen. No way I'm going down there. My EOD tech is like, no, it's no big deal. I'll go throw some C4 on that. He runs down the stairs, goes and sets these C4s on all the C4 blocks on all this, rigs a charge, comes back up. And so we're standing next to the mud wall with the basement that's sort of beneath us to the left. And he hands me the
like the clacker.
He hands me the clacker, and he's like, "Do you want to blow it up?" And I'm like, "All right, man, I guess." Right. So he's like, "All right, go for it." And we got our shoulders to the wall. We're hunkered down, and I do. I'm like, push, quarter turn, pull. Nothing happens. And he's like, "Do it again." And I'm like, push, quarter turn, pull. Nothing happens. It's like and now it's failed. And I'm like, oh God, right? And so we just had a failed explosive on this. He runs back down onto the charge after this has just failed, which anybody who's been around explosives knows, like, this is the last thing you would ever do.
Right. Especially without disconnecting it all. And yeah, exactly.
Insane.
Yeah.
And again, this is my first combat operation. All this is happening. I'm watching this. Like, I'm watching these guys that have done, multiple deployments, do this crazy shit. Like, this is what we do. We just do insane shit like this. So he runs down, rigs it up, and he rigs a way longer charge on it this time. So we're able to back up 15 more feet and get behind a different wall.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, okay, this seems a little bit more safe. And so we get behind the wall, and this time push, quarter turn, let it off, boom, right? The explosion is so big that it's basically raining mud clods across the entire objective. There's Afghans running around trying to get under cover. And I look up, and the building with the basement that we just had our shoulders next to, right, is gone. It's a giant crater in the ground. And I look at him, and I'm like, we were standing next to that when we tried to clack that off the first time, you know, and he was like, "Oh, whoops, no, it worked out." So yeah, and then the final part of that for sort of funny thing in first combat operation. So we get through that. We get to the sort of the line of advance, which was these 2-story compounds that ended up in a big vegetative field. And so we basically got up on top of these buildings, and there was actually Taliban that were maneuvering out in the grass, and sort of a gunfight sort of kicked off as me and another guy were up on top of the roof, and bullets start flying. So we just start waylaying rounds out into the forest, crazy. Basically, you're not really shooting at anything, like panicking, like backing up, getting down behind cover, and the same 18 Delta I was just talking about. So many combat deployments. He looks up over the ladder and is watching us and just starts laughing at us. And he's like, "What are you guys even shooting at?" You know what I mean? And we're like, "Is that worth a CIB?" And he's like, no chance, man. But yeah, so that was sort of my first time on a combat mission with just ridiculous stuff happening around me.
And it's funny too, because there are best practices, right? There are the things that this is how we do it. But then there's the reality and the practicality of, we're not waiting for our Iraqi minesweepers
right
to go ahead of us before every step we take.
Exactly. Yeah. So that right out the gate on that mission was me realizing and then later in combat missions and later in my career, you don't even think about stuff like that. But when you're a brand new guy and you've been training to standard, and then you're watching all these older guys just not do any of the things that, you said were the most important things to do.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah. And combat is one of those things, right, where because of it's ludicrous. Combat is just ludicrous, and the worst things happen and the funniest things happen, right, and everything's heightened and elevated.
Yeah, and it's funny because you say that is because some of the funniest stories, for example, that right after that near ambush, me laughing at Afghans taking tournament kits off their buddies,
right,
heinous things with hilarious things,
right,
and it's like. People that haven't ever experienced it, they can't really understand. I've had people say before when I'm telling those stories, you're laughing at things in the story, and they're like, they can't figure out. They're like, "This is intense and horrible. How could you be laughing at that?" And it's like, well, you have to really understand sort of the morbid reality of what's going on. And have that has to be part of your sense of humor. Otherwise, I don't think you could really function.
In
that combat reality, because it is so dark.
Right. And humor is that pressure release a lot of times. When a guy's clearing a building under fire and he steps in like a toilet hole and comes out to the knee coated in in shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
It's you're still under fire, but this is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I hope people don't, when I tell the stories, I hope people don't think that I'm cavalier about some of this stuff, because I can laugh about some of it. In reality, I've gone through a ton of behavioral health to deal with things I've been through. Years of work with therapists. But you have to be able to laugh about stuff like that, because I think, you have to compartmentalize it. Somehow, if you want to, continue to lead a decent mental stability in your life.
Yeah. But I think that you see the same type of behavior in ER doctors and nurses. You have to find that lining. Right.
Yeah. I think that's a good example for sure. People that, see a lot of death and tragedy, for sure. You have to be able to compartmentalize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was all that was a super active deployment. And then
and again, those were just three of the big ones. Every mission we had, I think we killed close to 600 confirmed, so Those 3 missions was probably 150 to 200. So, you still got 10 more missions where sporadic 10, 20 guys, 10, 20 Taliban here, there, small gunfights here, there, quick snippets, things like that. But it definitely was a hugely kinetic deployment overall, for sure.
You spoke to something earlier, a little bit, that, when you were in the bunkers or when you're taking out, like, one of the things that people don't understand in combat, especially when it's at night under night vision, it's very confusing, right? Like, a lot of times you don't even, like, one of your buddies might be in a gunfight and you have no idea where the fire is coming from. Like, it's just very confusing.
For sure. For example, the guy who got shot next to me, part of that being under night vision is I can't see what type of uniform he has on. I don't know. I can't tell. I can't see his face. I can't see really much about him.
Right.
Of me being worried is that my teammate, right?
Right.
No, and I don't want to sound morbid about it, but had I known right away that that wasn't my teammate, I wouldn't have been concerned whatever at all that an Afghan just got shot. I've been more focused on the gunfight, but that's sort of an example of what you're talking about, of sort of that fog of war, especially under night vision, is a real thing for sure.
Yeah. So, so you guys finish up your 2018 deployment, and then you're back on the chute, basically starting a training cycle for another deployment.
So, what had happened, so we come back from the 2018 deployment, and that team had been together for almost 3 years, almost every guy on that team. So it was sort of that time in everybody's career where broadening assignments were happening. Some of the higher ranking guys were moving into the E8 realm to take their own teams. So the team, I had to have surgery on both my knees. So, and some other guys had injuries they had to deal with. So that team sort of broke apart for the most part. And then I had recovery on my knees, and I ended up going to a mountain team after that, because by the time I had recovered, the dive team I was on had replaced the 18 Echoes. And my sergeant major asked me if I wanted to go ahead and be on a mountain team, which, I thought, cool. That's a new experience, which, that one, no combat on that one. We did a cool trip to Mongolia, which, that was an interesting one. Not many guys have been to Mongolia, which was a fun trip. But I was only on a mountain team for about a year and a half until 2020-ish, when the 18 Delta, my senior 18 Delta I've been talking about this whole time, he had taken a Halo team out in Okinawa, and there was another Afghanistan rotation getting ready to be spun up for the pre-train up, and he had one of the only teams from Okinawa that was going to be going to Afghanistan, because most teams hadn't from Okinawa hadn't been to combat in years.
Really interesting.
And so I reached out to him and was like, "Hey, do you need an 18 Echo?" This was also going to get me out of being a SWIC instructor, so I was able to stay on a team by bypassing that. So he was able to hold 18 Echo slot for me. I was able to PCS out to Okinawa, get on his team, and then we started another train up for the next Afghanistan rotation that we were going to do in 2021, which I could talk a little bit about that, because that is going to lend into obviously what everybody saw with what happened in Afghanistan. I don't know if we want to talk about things that are that politically charged on the show, but I could if you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's history. Let's not avoid it. I mean, it is what it is. Yeah. But I'm going to assume that at this point in time, you're the older, wiser man who foists the Carl Gustavs off to the Bravos.
Yeah, at this point, I'm 5 years on a team, right? So I'm a senior E7 at this point, element leader. I'm getting brought to the team to be sort of that guy that my 18 Delta, who was that senior guy for me with that experience as a team guy. He sort of is bringing me to the team to sort of be that guy for his team, sort of that right underneath him, senior leader at this point, going into the next combat.
So how does that? So tell us about that. You go to Okinawa. You go to the first group team out there.
Yeah, so he was in so I go see he's got a Halo team out in Okinawa, and again, most Okinawa hadn't been to Afghanistan in almost a decade, just because for whatever reason. But I don't know why we just all of a sudden decided we wanted 2 teams from Okinawa to go on the next Afghanistan deployment. I guess because of the highest levels, command was upset that Okinawa wasn't holding their weight in the combat realm. I don't know, whatever. But of course, my wild old 18 Delta senior, he was the one that managed, of course, to find his way to be team sergeant, to be the team that was going to go back to combat, because that's what he did. So I wanted to be a part of that. So he saved me a slot on the team. I PCS'd out there. I get to the team, and I mean, they're in train up for Afghanistan when I get to the team. So they are currently in SFAWIC, which is our Special Forces Urban Assaulter course. So usually as an ODA before combat, you do that together for about a month, which really trains tons of urban combat, CQB, all that different stuff as an ODA. So they're in the middle of that course when I get out to Okinawa, and then moving straight into the pre-mission training cycles of PMT 1, 2, and then a battalion validation. So sort of 3 different PMT events that we do, sort of that 6-month build up to a combat deployment. So that's how I get out there. So we do which is funny because we get out to Okinawa and then all our PMT stuff is in America. So I PCS out to Japan and immediately spend the next year back in America training. And so and the team I'm on is very good. So but again, we're the one Okinawa team that's going to deploy with one of the battalions from Group Maine. So nobody really was that happy about us being there. We were sort of like the stepchild. That was sort of us, and one of the teams from SECO, the CRIF, was also with us. That was going to be a part of it. But we ended up being one of the highest ranked teams at the validation, which sort of made sense because we had our team sergeant was the 18 Delta I was talking about, insane amount of combat experience, amazing leader. You had me as one of the element leaders, and then the second element leader on our team was one of the senior guys from that 2018 trip on our sister team that was in Helmand. So we had a huge senior core of guys. Our 18 Bravo had multiple combat deployments. So again, we had a ODA with a lot of combat experience, again, ready to go. So we were looking at having a pretty good mission going into that trip, which would have been into 2021. And then, so we finished both our PMTs, our validation, and we got back to Okinawa. We went on our 30 days pre-deployment leave, which is a pretty standard thing after your PMTs. You spend your time with your family, you grow out your beard, you get ready to leave, right? And so we had shipped all of our equipment and the ISUs to, I think it is going through Dubai into Afghanistan. I mean, we are that close to deploying to Afghanistan, right? Like we are 3 weeks into, we got like a week left. I got my beard grown out. We're ready to go. We're supposed to go to Bagram, basically, ideally, most likely going to be facilitating an entire SOTF. So upwards of 18 to 21 ODAs. We're going to be at Bagram to basically facilitate the next probably 6 months of leaving Afghanistan. That was sort of the idea at the time. I'm not an officer. I don't know the exact battle plan, but that sort of was the idea, which, made sense because, for what people don't realize is that we would have one SOTF, that same amount of ODAs that held control of the entire country of Afghanistan at a time, right? So you're going to have that level of firepower just up in Bagram to be able to facilitate that. And then we get the announcement basically right before we're going to leave of trips canceled. You guys aren't going. We're shipping your gear back, and we end up basically getting told we're going to Australia instead next week. So you can imagine we are not happy. Nobody's happy. And it's not our team. It's the entire SOTF. No SF guys will now be going into Afghanistan. So we just pulled out the guys who were there, all the teams, and our SOTIF was supposed to be the ones that backfilled that. And, you know, the powers that be decided we don't need that. And then here's the reality of what we saw happen right after that, and the catastrophe of the fall of Kabul and Bagram in Afghanistan. So, again, I hate to get too political, but the reality is I know that didn't have to happen the way it happened, because we were literally supposed to be there. And so people understand, the Taliban will not fight a SOTIF of Green Berets. They won't fight an ODA of Green Berets. Right. All you would need us is just to be there. Right. And the whole thing would have never happened, because they wouldn't have fought us. They wouldn't have tried. They would have just waited. Right. But as soon as they found out, oh, there's no more bearded ones. Oh, okay. Now we'll just take the country over. So that's the sad reality of, you know, what has happened. And I've watched, you know, podcasts of some of the guys that have lost legs and arms that were a part of that, and the guys that were killed, and it was all needless. None of it had to happen. So it's sad, for sure. And obviously, you know, I haven't really wanted to talk about that before, but it just pisses me off so much. You know, I've lost, you know, best friends and teammates to that war. Hardest part about it is the guys I've lost to that, and the time I spent there. And it was to watch that happen. So now it's a point where it's like, I don't care. I'm just going to be honest and tell the truth of what happened and what we had available, and the decisions that, you know, the government made. People should know that. I think they should know that a better plan was in place, and we actively decided, screw it, we don't care. We're going to do it this way instead. Right.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting that how you're speaking about this, because we've talked about it on the show a couple of times, but, you know, people talk about post-traumatic stress a lot, but something that doesn't come up in popular conversation yet is the idea of moral injury, you know, and this idea that, and obviously, you know, guys from Vietnam definitely had this too, especially guys who worked closely with the indigenous peoples. Is this idea that you look at an event like that and you say, it's not even withdrawing from Afghanistan, because I think that all like veterans and all like military people were like, yes, there needs to be a plan in place for withdrawing. Like we don't know what we're doing there. We're not like it's like you talked about the VSO. We took this ground and then we give it up. You know, our government at no point in time ever had a cohesive idea of what victory meant there. But then to just turn around and leave the way we left was psychologically, first off, it was harmful to the troops that were there. It was harmful to the Afghans, our Afghan allies. And then it was also harmful to the veterans, you know, and you know, and the people involved in that, who had been involved in that war. That was shitty.
Yeah, and you know, and you're right. Even when I was there, it was kind of like, what exactly are we doing here, right? Like, so once we had eliminated ISIS, Al Qaeda's gone. I mean, I'm not an idiot. The Taliban didn't care about global politics and everything. They just wanted everybody out so that they could, you know, have the country the way they wanted it. Right? Was the Taliban, you know, conducting terrorism across the world? No.
Right. Like, you know, they're assholes. They're horrible. Like they're horrible the way they treat women, the way they, you know, treat people. But is it our job to go everywhere and get rid of all horrible people all over the world?
Exactly. And that's what I mean is that, like, I think we were all aware. The only reason we were fighting was for the guys next to us. Right. When I was there, you know what I mean? But at the same time, you know, especially, you know, our guys like our Hazaran guys that were basically been keeping SF guys alive and keeping our legs on our bodies for 15 years. Those guys, I mean, so many times I would go to step somewhere and they would stop me, grab me, and they would make sure they stepped in front of me, if they would take that ID before I took it. Those were some of the people that we decided, nah, and those were the ones that got slaughtered by the Taliban because the Taliban knew that they had been working with U.S. SOF for so long, you know. So
Yeah.
You're right. I think, you know, I get to talk to my dad about that one a lot, having, you know, him being an ACAM guy in Vietnam and dealing with the Indige. And we talk sort of that same thing of, you know, we did the same thing to the Montagnards and the Vietnamese when we left Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, we left them to get slaughtered too. So
Yeah.
it's it is tough. And, you know, it's again, one of those things where I've, you know, sort of just kept my mouth shut about it for a long time, but I just am kind of tired of doing that because it just angers me so much in a lot of ways. Just being a guy who knew that, you know, like, and again, one of the frustrating things is like guys like me, SF guys with, at the time I would have had 7 years team time, combat experience, all these things. I would have been there on the ground in charge of ODAs facilitating that. And instead we sent a bunch of kids from the 82nd
Right.
that were 18, 19 years old to do that. You know
Right.
what I mean? That's what really drives me crazy is that, you know, we had guys like me and my teammates that, you know, what have you trained us for this whole time? That, like, you had everything you needed. You know, you had Delta, you had a whole SOTF, like everything was there. So it wasn't like we didn't have a better option. And I think
Right.
that's what I think angers us so much in that
Right.
regard.
Yeah, it was an administrative failure, and whether it was with, you know, the administration with Biden or with the military or the State Department, like I don't know how it all broke down, but
Yeah.
but it was a failure, a complete failure.
Yeah, and again, I have no idea where the order for us not to go came from.
Yeah.
No clue.
Right,
It was just, hey, you're not going.
right,
Divert.
right.
So
Let me see if we have any questions. Dee, do you mind checking Patreon? Let me see if we have any questions for you. What are you doing now? Where can people find you?
yeah, so I retired last month, and I am currently a firearms instructor. So started my own business. So my YouTube is Valhalla Firearms Training. So sort of, you know, Viking Valhalla Firearms Training. Same thing on Instagram, and just subset of what I do. So I kind of think of what I do is sort of being a Green Beret and for civilians, right? So I teach all kinds of different stuff, concealed carry courses, to trauma medicine, teach basic pistol to rifle courses, but also more advanced stuff in advanced carbine courses, CQB, things like that. I'm just getting started. I'm going to be relocating down in Oregon here in a couple weeks. But yeah, that's going pretty well. Looking to hopefully get into working with, you know, the SWAT teams and the sheriff's department and things like that down there. Really transferring all that knowledge that I have not only to that, but also to sort of the civilian community, so that they can, you know, defend, protect, you know, their families as well. Because I think there's so much that we learn and we get trained into that is applicable to civilians as well. So like I tell people, you know, I'm insanely well versed in CQB. It's the thing I took to the most in my career. I love it more than anything, but that's transferable to everyone, because if you're a gun owner and you have a home, what is your home? Your home is a CQB situation. You know what I mean? Do you know how to fight off a home invader? You know, things like that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now is ideally, you know, I worked for the government for so long. Hopefully I can, you know, build my own business, which is going really well so far. Already have that all started, but, you know, hopefully doing the part of my military career as a Green Beret that I love, and then, you know, transitioning that into the civilian world as well, because I think I have a lot of beneficial stuff to impart on people that are interested.
That's fantastic. So can people come to you for their Carl Gustav training needs also?
Yeah, no, I don't have a Carl Gustav, and I also don't shoot him anymore. I've had my brain rattled one too many times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You only need to be. The Carl Gustav is one of those things like when they're like, "Hey, we have X rounds. Who wants to shoot him?" Everybody's like, "Nah, I'm good."
No, I'm good. Yeah,
I'm good.
I'm good. For sure.
So Joe's Gotcha, thank you very much. I know you're not SOT A, but in the time frame you were in Afghanistan, did you see the Taliban adapting, changing, and to our SIGINT capabilities?
Ooh, that's a good one. So we always had SOT-As with us on mission, but I really hate to try to talk on things that I'm not an expert on, and that's really, the SOT-A realm is really their own separate thing. So I don't have a good answer on that. I actually don't know on that one.
Yeah. Now, as an Echo, you didn't have any like big draw to the SOT-As. You're like, oh, you guys do your thing.
Yeah, surprisingly, so not really. I mean, as an 18 Echo, I didn't really get into a whole lot of that because we usually had 2 SOT-As attached.
Yeah.
And again, we're so split up on 4 different elements. Like your MOS is sort of a very, very secondary thing.
Yeah.
Whether you're an 18 Echo or a Charlie or a Bravo, like in combat, you are an operator on an element. For my specific MOS, that pretty much was over, once we left the team room. Once everybody's radios are filled and, everything's good and everybody's got comms, they, other than me being dual commed and listening in on, also the aircraft and things like that, like that side of it was pretty much over. The rest of it was, focused on clearing operations and that side of it.
Yeah. You mentioned, that you had these combat enablers in your CCT guide and you guys had a lot of error. Like we've talked about on the show before, like the JTACs, the CCT, the TAC-Ps, like how professional, like how good those guys are at their jobs.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am a SOTAC, I am
okay.
a JTAC, so I can talk on that. But, for us, as an SF guy, I have so many sort of hats and jobs that I'm wearing, especially as you get into the senior levels of it, where you might be a main element leader. So, yeah. For example, if I'm a main element leader and I'm in control of moving 30 guys, I can't also be the guy who's battle tracking everyone around me, who's controlling aircraft, who's calling in strikes. There's no way that I could ever do both of those things. So, typically, I do know a few SF guys, SOTACs that did do it in combat, and were their team's main guys. But for the most part, we usually had Air Force CCTs or JTACs attached.
Yeah,
just because our workload's way too high to be able to handle stuff like that.
And that's a full-time job. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to do that and anything else. Right?
No, it's an MOS by itself, and it's the most important MOS or job on the ground as well, and it's the most dangerous one because if you mess up, you're going to kill your own guys. Yeah. So there's no room for error on that at all. So you don't want a guy who's like controlling aircraft as his third job. Yeah. That's not ideal.
Yeah. Jackson, thank you very much. Did you ever work with the SIF, CTAC, or CAG in SF? What were your thoughts? Also, how often do you see guys want to go either route?
So, I heard CAG, but what was the other one?
The SIF, but I think they got rid of the SIF, didn't they?
Oh, CRIF?
Oh, is it CRIF now?
Yeah, CRIF. I'm sure they're talking about CRIF. So the CRIF is in Okinawa. Yeah, so they got rid of the CRIF, right? They don't call them the CRIFs anymore, but CECO is still the CRIF. They're still doing the same functions. So I was looking at going to CECO, but CECO's mission set didn't really lend to combat really at all. So a lot of guys had sort of gone away from CECO to the line ODAs. For example, in my last ODA, we had 2 or 3 guys that were from the CRIF originally, which was great for me because I've been trained by the CRIF guys for so long in my career in CQB and stuff like that, which they are absolutely insanely good at. I mean, that is, when you talk about CQB and stuff like that, the CRIF and Delta, those guys, that's the ultimate level, highest level in the world, both those organizations. So yeah, I worked with a ton of CRIF guys because I had them on my team, which has been great for me because I've stolen so much of what I know from those guys. And then for Delta, yeah, I worked with quite a few Delta guys on different types of things. So on that 2018 trip, we had a contracted advisor that was a 20-year CAG Sergeant Major who was one of the most, I'm not going to give any names, but he's one of the most awarded soldiers in American history. And he was with us and out on every operation. So working with him was pretty wild on one, just the stories, but just that level of professionalism. You know, there's levels of professionalism. Even in the soft world, you have special forces very high, and then you get to Delta Force, and it's just insanely professional. And then also I did not an operation, but a training event with CAG surveillance unit a few years ago. And that was really cool. I played a North Korean security guard. So their guys could surveil us through, I'm not going to say areas or anything like that because, it's sensitive, but I got to be a part of watching them do that side of things, which was pretty awesome. Those guys are, I've got quite a few close friends and old teammates who are over in CAG now. So, I get a little bit of knowledge here and there about what they're doing, but yeah, definitely those guys are incredible for sure.
Fantastic. I got to if there's one thing you could take away from the U.S. Army Special Forces, if there's one thing you could add or take away from SF, what would it be?
Ooh, add or take away. So it already happened for takeaway, which was when SVAB was created, right? So the SVAB, for those who don't know, sort of came in and took the place of training the host nation armies, regular army forces, which Special Forces was dealing with for a long time, which just became such a huge pain for us in trying to deal with that, and then also running operations. So I actually do like that happened. Something that we could add to Special Forces. So I think making SF a tier 1 unit so that we had the funding that, things like Ranger Battalion have. I think it's, kind of BS that, Ranger Battalion and no knock on Ranger Battalion. Like, those guys are awesome. I mean, a third of the SF guys I know are from Ranger Battalion, but, it's kind of pisses us off that, there's the 18-year-old Ranger guys running around that are tier 1 and a 40-year-old SF guy with 10 years experience and I'm a tier 2 operator. But yeah, I would say that.
Has it changed? Because Rangers used to be tier 2 and then SF I thought was tier 3. Did that change?
Yeah, so that's changed. So Rangers are tier, as far as it used to be, Rangers are tier 1 because they do a lot of stuff with CAG. And then SF is tier 2.
Okay.
Now that could have changed recently or whatnot, but from the last time I remember that.
I mean, I'm just like going back to like when I was in, which ages ago. So
So yeah, definitely, because I do remember, because it was when we were in Afghanistan, it was always CAG and Ranger Battalion that were getting 160th instead of our ODA. So and that was why, right? So
and you guys got the tail landing, the rotor strikes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got the 160th sometimes, but then we would also get the Hawaiian National Guard, aircraft sometimes for like high profile missions, which just seemed kind of wild, but yeah.
And then Scott, thanks. Any tips for a 29-year-old trying to actually learn a second language for the first time? Japanese.
Oof, man, Japanese. Yeah. So, foreign language is rough. Chinese was really, really rough. I would say you have to really just get immersed in it. We in language school, you do 6 months straight at 8 hours a day with an instructor who is from that country, and you pretty much exclusively speak it. The best way I've seen guys learn it is through what's called a LET, or they actually go live in, if you're Japanese, you actually go live in Japan with a Japanese family, and guys can learn it way faster that way. But if you don't have access to that, then however you can immerse yourself into it, the better. It's foreign language isn't really, there's no secret to it. I think it's just the more you speak it, and the more you immerse yourself in it, the faster you're going to pick it up, for sure.
Yeah. And when you consider that any 5-year-old in any country can speak their language,
yeah, for sure.
It points to what you're saying, is that it's immersion.
Yeah.
It's that repetition of, for sure. So everybody check out Nate at Firearms or Valhalla Firearms Training on YouTube. Like, subscribe right now. And and also Valhalla Firearms Training on Instagram. What were you saying, D?
In the description.
Huh?
In the description.
Oh, it's in the description. Yeah, it's down in the description. But also, if you're listening on the podcast, check them out. Subscribe, follow, join. Nate, thank you very much.
Yeah, this was fun for
Really
sure.
appreciate it. Yeah. So
I like it's my second podcast I've done, and it's definitely so much of this stuff I haven't really talked about before, other than with my teammates. So it's kind of therapeutic in a way, I think.
Yeah.
To sit down with another soft guy like you, and who understands and have a free sort of safe space to talk about this type of stuff. So
Yeah.
definitely a cool experience. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you, man. Like we appreciate you coming on. We, like our goal here is just to record history on the personal level. And, and there are things that, like, if we could go back and listen to podcasts with the guys who were on Omaha Beach, or, it's amazing. And we have a unique way of capturing history these days that they didn't have in the past, where, hopefully one of these days, your kids, your grandkids, your grandkids will be able to find this and see who you were.
Yeah. And, that's a cool way you put it. And, you think about it, all the stuff, it's not just me, it's just what my ODA has done and all the guys have done, I mean, without something like this, that's going to disappear someday, and nobody but us is going to know. And you're right. I think, as I've gotten older and gotten away from it, and just all the things I know so many guys that I've worked with have done to not let the American public know what our SOF operators have done over the last 20 years, I think is a grave injustice to not only us, but also to the American people. I think they need to know sort of the heroism and the things that they have no idea were happening.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I would go so far to say not even just the SOF operators, like, like anybody who was involved in the conflicts, anybody who was, like, there's so much history there from,
you mentioned that, and you're absolutely right. I shouldn't say just SOF operators. For example, I was watching Cody Alford's podcast with Sean Ryan talking about Fallujah. And, I've got buddies that were in Fallujah. They haven't really talked to me about the stories, but listening to his story about that is absolutely, even for me, was like, God, I was in some heinous stuff, but I cannot even imagine being in that, which is wild. I actually know that he talked about a Delta Force operator that killed Uday Hussein in his podcast. Actually, we know the guy that he's talking about. But yeah, you listen to that and you're like, this is a 19-year-old kid that type of thing that I couldn't even fathom as a at my level of what that was like. Insane.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Gucci earlier, and SOF had a very Gucci war in these wars, and it's not that SOF didn't like undergo stuff, but there were like people out at these FOBs, conventional, that were out there for 12, 14 months, like hooking and jabbing every single day,
for sure,
without the AC-130, without the A-10s, without all that stuff, and it's like I said, I've talked about this before, but like some of the people I have the most respect for are the Arkansas National Guards, like they're I don't know, they're Cav or Bradley, like whatever, like those guys were hooking and jabbing all day long in Iraq.
And you bring up a great point, and what I mentioned earlier, talking to about my dad and some of those guys and their stories, that's sort of the realization for me of like, I was in nasty firefights and things like that, but I flew back to the FOB and went back and called my wife and had chow after that. You know what I mean? So when you talk about sort of the level of comfort and the back half of the last 10 years of the war, when I fought it, I'm not naive to think that I was, in any of the nastiest stuff compared to what you're talking about there, for sure, or in prior wars. I definitely got to do the Gucci side of war where we flew in and we had the advantage.
Well,
and the
me
night
too.
vision.
Yeah. And Jack,
We took
like,
the fight.
yeah.
We had all the air assets.
You got the air
you know,
stacked.
and
yeah.
again, we got nasty situations and we got fucked up in a lot of ways. But which you can't really compare those. You can't. I try not to compare myself to anyone else. I think you can't do that because I think we're all of us that have been war fighters and we've all gone through different
absolutely.
things.
Absolutely.
But there's still that.
Yeah.
There's still that common thread that binds us all together that have been through that type of thing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we deeply, deeply appreciate you. We thanks for spending a Friday night with us.
Yeah.
Everybody check out Valhalla Firearms Training. Check out our sponsors, AARP Veteran Report and Vitamin One. And we will see you, is it next Friday, D? Monday.
Aaron Hale, former EOD guy who got injured. Yeah.
Monday, the 14th, I think, we have Aaron Hale on. He's a former EOD, got injured. Now he runs ultra marathons.
I don't know how anybody in EOD hasn't, like how there's somebody in EOD that hasn't been injured. It's like the most stressful job, I think, in the military. But
For sure.
So we'll see you guys Monday. Jack will be back, hopefully. And Nate, we will see you soon, man.
All right.
You can hang out for a second. We'll say goodbye to everybody else. Thanks, everybody.